IB Nation, welcome back to another edition of the Irish Breakdown Podcast. You all know that guy right there. That's Ryan Roberts, our Director of Recruiting. I'm Brian Driscoll, and we are here today to talk some Notre Dame football. You know, Ryan, it's kind of interesting. A lot of people ask about, they want to talk about sort of the next season and the offseason, and I want to remind people, we're not to the offseason yet. Notre Dame has another game left to play. And we will find out on Sunday who that game will be, Ryan. But I do think as we dive into this period leading up to signing day, pre-bowl game, it is a good time to kind of take a look back at what we went through the last year and start to kind of get a glimpse of the future, which some of it I hope that we'll see in the bowl game. And obviously, as the Lucky Lefty podcast pointed out earlier, if you're not subscribed to the Lucky Lefty podcast, you need to check it out. That it's been a year. This is a 1-year anniversary of Brian Kelly stepping away from Notre Dame, and a lot has changed in a year. And I'm not going to take the route that I initially wanted to go and kind of make it a petty, glad he's gone kind of thing. Everybody knows my feelings on that, but more so look at it from where's this program kind of gone over the last year? What did we learn about this team this season? Some of the good things we learned about it, some of the things that weren't so good, because the one thing we can agree on, Ryan, is 8-4 is not good enough. And I would imagine and be willing to bet that Marcus Freeman and Tommy Rees and Al Golden and Mike Mickens and Harry Heastan and go down the line, Dylan McCullough, Chancey, they'd all tell you the same thing. This isn't good enough, right? There may be some reasons why, but 8-4 with losses to Stanford and Marshall is not good enough. And this program should be better and will be better. That's the sort of the negative. The positive is, I think we learned some things about this team that they're not there yet. In some areas, they're not as close as we thought they were. In other areas, I think they're a little bit closer than we thought they were. And the fixes are going to be a little bit easier. So that's going to be the focus of sort of this show, Ryan. But at the end of the day, we said before the season, anything less than 10-2 was not going to be good enough. I think that I was willing to go 9-3 because of how some things transpired early in the season. But you lost your chance to really redeem that with the loss to USC. So clearly there's work to be done here. But I also really feel like in a lot of ways, a foundation was laid this season with what this program can be on and off the field. And I think that's the thing that has me, sort of encouraged. I guess I'm disappointed in the season, Ryan, but I'm very encouraged about where this program is headed because of some of the things that we saw this year.
I mean, I am too. I think a great point that you start out with, Brian, is that the coaching staff is not okay with an 8-4 record, right? Like they're not okay with that standard at Notre Dame. And I mean, when you look up and down the coaching staff, it's a staff full of winners. I mean, Harry Heastan's been a part of some great teams, obviously, that have had a lot of success at Notre Dame. Marcus Freeman was on very successful Ohio State teams and then Cincinnati teams, and he has a high expectation. You have two coaches that have coached in Super Bowls pretty recently, one that's won a Super Bowl, and Dylan McCullough. You have coaches throughout the roster that have done a lot of winning in their lives, both as players, as coaches. So we know what the standard is at Notre Dame. We don't have to sit here and act and, do a facade that this season's result is a positive one, right? Like 8-4, no matter how you push it at Notre Dame, is not a successful season. But I also do think that people get a little too hyperbolic about things sometimes, right? 8-4 is not a success, but there's also a short-term versus long-term aspect to this conversation that we can have, right? Like there's a lot of positives that we can take on this season from position groups, from individual players, from coaching performances that you can say 2023, looking up, 2024, looking up. The long-term aspect of this program, I feel like it's still in very good hands. And I feel like there's a lot of positives that you could take from this year, although not positive in the record. You can say there's a lot to build on here. So I'm still positive with what the future holds with this with this coaching staff and this team. I am.
So let's begin with Ryan. By the way, it was under the 90-second over-under. We made a bet on how long it would take for someone to make a comment that I'm not wearing a hat. And it was less than 90. Ryan said over-under is 90 seconds. And I said, I kind of agreed with him on that. But I think it begins, first of all, the conversation about Marcus Freeman.
Yep.
And I am not one of those people that says, I'm glad that they lost games because they learned lessons from those losses. That's not me. And that's like, to me, that would be spin. If I were to say that, that would be spin. But what I will say is what I also am a believer in is when that adversity comes, you're going to learn a lot more about people in those instances. You learn it when, I'll like, for example, my marriage. I learned a lot more about my wife and our relationship when we were going through tough times than I did when we were going through good times. It's easy to enjoy each other's company when everything is great and we both have jobs and everything is wonderful and we're getting along and our dogs are healthy and everything is growing good. But how do you handle, where's your marriage at when, somebody loses a job, a dog gets sick, a family member's going through tough times, that we're not on the same page. And it's the same thing as I'm not going to say, hey, man, I really want some marital problems so that my wife and I can grow stronger. But how do you handle them when they come? And that's how I feel about this season, right? Is you look at it and say, I'm not happy that they went 8-4. I'm kind of still ticked that they lost to Marshall and Stanford. There's no excuse for it. But I do feel also that we learned a lot about this football team and especially the head coach through those, because I think that Coach Freeman went through what a lot of guys who've never been head coaches go through. And that is, when you're an assistant coach, you always have this vision of, well, when I'm a coordinator, I'm going to do it this way. When I'm a head coach, I'm going to do it this way. And I think we saw some things with Coach Freeman this season where he thought it was going to go a certain way. He wanted to give each assistant coach is the head coach of his room. And that sounds great. And it's a nice sentiment, and I'm sure as an assistant coach, you wanted it that way. But then you become the head coach, and you realize, no, there can only be one head coach, and that's got to be me, right? And yes, everyone has to have a voice, but there needs to be a very clear structure of what that looks like. And I think that one of the mistakes that Coach Freeman made was, I think he tried to be a coach. People say he's a player's coach. No, he's not. He's a coach's coach. And I think that was one of the things where he went a little bit too far in one direction of allowing everybody to kind of do their thing and not have enough of, no, this is my butt on the line ultimately, and we're going to do this my way. We're going to do this my way. And so the Stanford game to me was the bottom point of this season.
Yeah.
And because Marshall finished 8-4, Charles Huff's doing a really nice job with that program and did a really nice job with that program. And that was an unacceptable loss, but you could kind of chalk it up to game 2, the emotion of coming down from the Ohio State game. You were missing some players here or there. You're still getting used to this, that, or the other thing, right? The Stanford game, it was just even worse. It was just completely inexcusable because it was a bad team. You were coming off of some quality wins, and where we were hearing about fractured locker room and fractures in the staff and all these different, there was a lot of drama beyond just losing to Stanford.
Mm-hmm.
And it was a huge early test for Marcus Freeman, one that you and I talked about. And I don't know if we talked about this on the show, but I know you and I and Sean talked about this off the air of this could be a make or break moment for Marcus Freeman already. How he handles this is going to tell us, because if he would have handled it a certain way, you may never get the locker room back.
Mm-hmm.
And if you handle it another way, you may lose some coaches. You've got to try to find that middle ground. And from everything we've heard is there were conversations that were had with Coach Freeman, his assistants, with the team, and sort of this is how we're going to do things. And not a blaming type of you F this up, this is your fault, but more of a, look, this isn't acceptable. That's on me. This is what we're going to do moving forward. Right. And I think that was a pivotal moment for him. And again, the season didn't end the way that we would have wanted. But I even think in the USC game, for all the things we could pick apart about what they should have done here schematically, or, this play should have been made, this team showed a lot of heart. They fought, they battled. It's not good enough. It's not acceptable because Notre Dame should have won that game. That should always be the expectations for Notre Dame. But the team that played that game and lost was a whole lot different than the team that played against Stanford and Marshall and lost.
Yes.
And it showed growth. And you look at the wins in between, the convincing win over Clemson, the convincing win over Syracuse, the dominant win over Boston College. I mean, all the different things that we saw growth.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that now you head into the offseason where, Marcus Freeman has still been on the job less than a year as of right
Mm-hmm.
now.
Mm-hmm.
And the growth that he's had kind of going through the season of lessons learned. And now you go into this offseason, you don't have to go through coaching searches for 3 months like you did last offseason,
Right.
trying to put a staff. I mean, he didn't get his full staff together till what, like March? I think because he had Heastan hired late. You had Gal Golden was hired late because he wasn't hired till after the Super Bowl.
Mm-hmm.
And so you look at it and say, those are done for. I mean, you may have a coach leave here and there, but your staff's in place. And I'm not saying that they're going to lose a coach. I'm just saying you never know. That's just part of the nature of coaching. It's very rare that a team brings back all of their assistant coaches. And especially if you have good coaches, and Notre Dame has some really, really good coaches. And so, but for the most part, there's a staff in place. In place. There is a system in place. There's an operation in place. There's a structure of leadership in place now that didn't really exist a year ago at this time.
Yeah.
And, or didn't exist at all a year ago this time because they didn't have a head coach a year ago at this time.
Mm-hmm.
And 10 months ago, 9 months or 11 months ago when Marcus Freeman was hired. And then, of course, then you got to spend that next month of bowl prep sort of coaching someone else's team for all intents and purposes.
Yeah.
And so you go into the offseason and then there's who's coming back and we've got it was all new. Now you've learned your lessons. You've kind of, hey, this really worked. This didn't work. And you get ready to move on to next year. And I think those are things that I look at and say, those are areas where I feel like that's a positive as you look at this football team growing.
Yeah. Well, Brian, let me ask you a question because this is something that we've never talked about, and I'm actually like genuinely curious about it, right? So obviously Marcus Freeman was on the previous staff for a year, right? So he had gotten an opportunity to see how Notre Dame football was being run, how Coach Kelly did things, how they did things from a day-to-day perspective during the season, before the season, all those things, right after the season. And I'm curious if maybe early on, and I don't know if this is true, this is just me talking out loud, if that Coach Freeman was compromised a little bit, right? As in, yes, I want to do it my way, but these things have worked for this team, right? So structurally, I don't want to change everything. And I wonder if there was a point during the season where he was just kind of like, that was probably that was my fault. I shouldn't have done that. I should have completely changed everything that we did. Well, not everything, but changed it to be stuff that I fully believed in instead of compromising it all with what the team was used to. Because that was one thing. I mean, the players love Coach Freeman. I mean, you saw that uproar and in a good way when he got the job and when they showed him for the first time, and the players were obviously super excited about him getting the opportunity. Right. But I am curious if there was some compromise early on as far as structurally how we ran the program. And then if during the season that breaking point was kind of the last point of like, hey, I got to get rid of the past, right? Like we have to move forward and we have to be unique to ourselves. And this has to be run the way I want to. So just me talking out loud, Brian, like, I don't know if like you think that there might be something to that. I don't know. It's interesting though. It's interesting.
I've heard some little things about that. Some things that he did is just trying to continue what has worked. I think another part of this too, Ryan, is there's going to be a natural, even for players who maybe didn't like Brian Kelly, there's going to be a natural, but this worked kind of thing. Like the Notre Dame players, for the most part, did not like Brian Kelly. And that's just a fact. That's not anything anyone can really argue against. But there's also a level of respect for the job he did as the coach in that they won. Now, some players were like, we won in spite of him, but a lot of them were like, hey, I didn't like him, but, he did this and it worked. And so I think there was a level of you kind of have to continue that. And then when you do change things and you don't have success, you're going to have veteran players. They're going to be like, or parents, which is something else I've heard, that are going to point to and say, well, see, Brian Kelly did it this way and it worked. Right. And that created a fracture at times. And I think what happened was Marcus Freeman, as well as with the leadership of the team,
Mhm.
kind of said, no, we're not going to do that anymore. We're not going to do that anymore. And you heard little things like Michael Mayer made some comments later in the year about how things were early in the year, and
Mhm.
there were issues that were going on,
Right.
but they were able to be resolved over the course of the year, which shows this is growth, right?
I
And not letting it fester is
yeah,
an important thing, right?
I guess what I'm kind of hinting at is I wonder if it would have been different. And obviously, the situation would have been completely different. So
Yeah,
Marcus Freeman would have never been the head coach if it was otherwise. But what if Marcus Freeman was at LSU for a year, right? Like he almost went to. And then he comes from LSU to Notre Dame, not knowing anything about the program, having a blank
right.
slate, and starting completely from scratch. Would it
Or
have looked different?
or replacing a coach that was fired who didn't
Right.
have success. No, I get all that, and I'm agreeing with you that I think that when you're replacing a coach that had success, you can't just say screw all that. We're throwing all that out. We're going to go. And I think sometimes you kind of have to absorb a certain way, especially when you're still trying to get your feet wet. Like if a coach came in who had experience and said, he look, I have a way, or they hire. I'm trying to think of a name without having people lose their minds. Let's just say Urban Meyer gets hired, and I would have not been happy about that. But
Yeah.
he would have come in and said, I don't care what was done before, we're gonna do it my way. And he would
Sure.
have sort of the reputation and the resume to be like, yeah, okay, cool. I mean, that's what we're gonna do.
And you buy into it easily. Right.
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 And
Right.
whereas with Coach Freeman, because he wasn't a head coach, I think there was a natural, okay, I don't want to throw everything out. Let's continue some things. And I think that's why we saw a team early in the year that wasn't quite able to live up to the identity that he wanted. And
Right.
I think we saw some of those changes but no, the other part of it is, there were some injuries and things like that. And I think
Sure.
not having Jared Patterson and not having Avery Davis took away your two of your three best leaders on offense and all those other type of things. So I think it's one of those things where you look at and say, he didn't quite, he went through some growing pains as a head coach. I mean, I think
Yep.
he has admitted that publicly. He's admitted
Yeah.
that. And I've actually been very surprised at his candor at times.
Mhm.
Because Brian Kelly, the frustrating thing with him is he would always spin something to make it where it wasn't his fault. Even
Right.
when he would accept blame, he did it in a way that you could tell he clearly doesn't actually believe that, or he would then spin it in a different direction. We're seeing that at LSU now.
Mhm.
It's like, it's my fault, but there's always like a but kind of thing built into it.
Oh, yeah.
And I think that Marcus Freeman kind of being open about, hey, I didn't know how to handle losing to Marshall. I didn't know what buttons to push. Well, yeah, you have been here you've got 2 games as a head coaching experience. Like, yeah, okay, I get that. But then also showing late in the year that he did figure out which buttons to push with the team.
Exactly.
And I think
Exactly.
all of those things were important to learn. Now, I would have rather they have learned those with wins. I would
Mhm.
have rather they come back and beat Marshall late and come back and beat Stanford late and learn the lessons that way. Because you can still, and Coach said this recently, and we've always said this, you can learn lessons from victory or defeat. It's just
Yes.
they're going to be a little bit different. But a smart coach, a good coach who's process driven, is going to be able to look at a win over Marshall that, Tyler Buckner hits that late shot
Mhm.
or they make that third down stop on backed up, and they make those stops, and then they go punch it in, and they win 22-12. You're still going to look back and say, man, we got to get better here, 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 and here.
Right.
You don't need the loss
Mhm.
to grow. But when you do, it kind of smacks you right in the face, and you have no choice
Right.
but to react that way.
Well, and
And so, go ahead,
I
Ryan.
I mean, he's a younger guy, right? So there's some benefits of the doubt to understanding that there has to be natural maturation, right? There has to be growing. I think that what you feel comfortable with after this season, although it's not the result you wanted, is that you did see growth from Marcus
Right,
Freeman as a coach during the season. And that gives
right.
me more hope for next year. When you are a professional that wants to be the best that he possibly can, it's all about understanding that you can get better each and every day, that you still have opportunity to grow. My
Yeah,
dad always told me the minute that you know everything is the minute to do something else, to try something new, right? So I think that Coach Freeman knows that he can get a lot better in what
yeah,
he's doing, and he has the opportunity to move forward. And I think you saw instances during the season of that
yeah.
he understands that it needs to happen and that he's open to it happening, which gives me a
Right,
lot of hope for the
right.
future of the program. A lot.
I've met your dad, so I
Yes.
can see him saying that, and that's a great lesson. the thing too, Ryan, that I think is important to mention here is when things failed, what a lot of coaches will do, especially younger coaches, coaches without conviction, is they're like, man, this is not good. And you'll see it all the time, Ryan, with coaches that fail, is okay, that wasn't working. Let's throw that out and let's go a different direction. When stuff hit the fan for Notre Dame, which really was the the Stanford game, but even coming out of the Marshall game, what did Notre Dame do the next week? They were dead set on figuring out a way to run the football the next week, right? And shutting down the Cal run game. And then, of course, against North Carolina. But then when stuff hit the fan against Stanford, he doubled down. He said, no. We're not only going to continue to do what I believe in, but we're going to do it even more. We're going to push even harder. We're going to focus on even more. We're going to come out and even be more physical in the run game. We're going to come out and even be more physical on defense. We're going to focus even more on shut down the run. And again, they're far from perfect, as the USC game showed. Mm-hmm. But I think that showed a core conviction that is needed. Now, we could argue and debate about whether or not he should, want to run an offense like this or a defense like this. And there's always going to be that. And that's part of the fun of covering a team, is it? Yeah. You're not going to agree with everything that a coach does. And if you do, you've kind of become a fanboy and you're not really an analyst anymore. You're just a fan that's got a show and you're just talking, right? So there will always be things like that we'll disagree with. But I think that for a coach to be successful, you have to have core convictions. Mm-hmm. And even in the face of adversity, you have to believe in those core convictions. Now, you may change and you should change. Okay, we need to look at our practice structure. We need to look at our substitution philosophy. We need to look at, okay, are we not doing enough of this? Are we doing too much of this? Those things should all be on the table when you lose. But the foundation of what you believe in has to stay the same. If you're someone that believes in being a physical running football team, just because you have some not good success really doesn't mean you abandon it. Screw it. Let's go with the air raid. That's why Charlie Weiss failed. Mm-hmm. So like after 2006, Charlie Weiss went away from what he believed in because he thought, well, I don't have this or I don't have that. Remember when he tried to put in this gimmicky like read zone stuff with Demetrius Jones, and it didn't work, and he kind of went, and every time he'd fail, like he would just kind of like throw the baby out with the bathwater and try to go in a different direction. Then there wasn't a core conviction that he really believed in as far as what the foundation of the team was going to be about. Now, he had a play calls that he believed in and an offensive system he believed in, but that's not a foundation. That's not a foundation of who you are as a football team. Right. Marcus Freeman can believe in running the football and say, we're going to go about it 9 different ways. It doesn't really matter, but I'll tell you what we're going to do. Hey, Tommy, I don't care if you run duo, inside zone, counter, but here's what I'm demanding. We're going to run the football and we're going to be physical, right? That doesn't mean that you only throw 8 times a game either, right? Defensively, this is whether you want to do it at a 3-3-5, a 4-2-5, a 4-3, a 3-4, I don't care, but this is what we're going to do. This is what we're going to be about as a program. Then that's what we're going to recruit to. That's what we're going to do in the offseason. It's what we're going to expect of them in the dorms. It's what we're going to expect of them in the cafeteria, in the classroom. These are the things we're going to expect of you. Discipline, focus, attention to detail, all those type of things. And he never wavered on that. And that's something that a lot of young coaches will do is that. And I think that also played a role in, Ryan, why we did see sort of the bounce back that we saw. Far from perfect. They were just out-talenting people at times in certain areas, but they were able to do that later in the season in a way they couldn't early because they started kind of believing in the foundation of this is the identity of this team. And an identity of a team is not about an offensive system, a defensive scheme, certain run calls, certain third down blitzes. An identity of a team is how do you go about your business on an everyday basis? Mm-hmm. And then the system and the scheme has to fit that. And that's what started to really kind of say, and I was told there was this is what we're going to do. You're either with us or you're not. And everybody rallied around it. And I think that's a big reason why we saw this team. They're not perfect. They didn't finish the way you wanted to. You had the ugly win over Navy and the lost USC, but you saw the growth. And I think it was for Marcus Freeman, it had to have been something, I would imagine. This is me reading the situation. It was confirming. No, we can win this way. Yeah. Right? Again, you look at the Clemson game. We can win this way. And if you think about the USC game, they couldn't stop Caleb Williams. They couldn't stop the run game. They couldn't run the ball. USC neutralized their special teams, and yet Notre Dame is still 2 unforced turnover errors away from having a chance to get the ball in the fourth quarter, a chance to win. Yep. Right. But that shows that, okay, we got a lot to clean up on,
Mm-hmm.
but we're a pretty good football team, right?
Yeah.
I mean, we've got some ability. And I think the way that they finished was frustrating, I'm sure, for the coaches, but also confirming of why did we lose to USC? We didn't do the two things that Marcus Freeman said that they're going to be about: running the football and stopping the run. They didn't do that. And, we'll get into some of the areas that they got to improve. And that's going to be one of the things we're going to focus on is that. And so he can point to and say, we lost. Why? Because we didn't do what we have said we are going to be as a football team.
Mm-hmm.
That's the conversation. Hey, I've said you got to be able to stop the run. So why are we coming out in a 3-3-5? I mean, those are conversations that you have. Now, of course, he knew that we were going to do that. He was, but those things you look at and say not. And I'm saying he's not saying that the Al Golden is like blaming. I had no idea you were going to do this. I'm saying sometimes you say that as a coach, like looking back, you're like, God, I was stupid. I can't believe I did that, right? And I can't believe I focused on that, knowing that, like, that's what you do when you lose, right? I mean, you reflect back and thinking, man, I shouldn't have done that. We should have done something different. And I think those are the lessons. And I think the way that they finished the season was confirmation of Marcus Freeman. Like, no, this is how you win at Notre Dame. This is how you win at Notre Dame. And I want to make a point about this, Ryan, because there's an example, and it hurts me to say this, but there's a great example of why, even in the face of adversity, you have to be who you are. And if you can't be who you are, you need to leave.
Mm-hmm.
I really thought Jim Harbaugh's tenure at Michigan was over in 2020. They went 2-4. That team quit at the end of the year. I mean, just flat quit. They wanted no part of playing Ohio State, right? It was COVID and all this other stuff. That team was a joke. I mean, you're a 2-4 team. You're coming off of a 2019 season where you went 9-4. You got blasted by Ohio State at the end of the year. You got embarrassed by Michigan in the bowl game. You got blown out earlier that year by Wisconsin. You come out the next year, you go 2-4, and all the success that they had was gone. Now, he overhauled his coaching staff, and he made some philosophical changes on defense, but they never wavered on who they are. They doubled down on who they are. And since that time, so he brings in Sharon Moore. They become a very physical football team. It's funny that when the genius Josh Gaddis leaves, the offense looks exactly like it did when he was here, and you realize it wasn't. And then you see Miami grasping at straws offense, and you're like, no, that was Jim Harbaugh's offense, not Josh Gaddis's offense. And he doubled down. This is who we're going to be. And what happens? The last 2 years, they've gone 23-1 in the regular season. Right. And now, like Jim Harbaugh or not, but the reality is, if you have a core conviction, you build around that conviction. You hire to that conviction. And if players don't want to buy in, then go somewhere else. If they buy in, then we're going to be all right because the players are there. And I think that was a lesson. And you can win that way. Michigan has shown you can go beat a fast, athletic, up-tempo, high-octane pass offense if you kick their teeth in for 60 minutes.
Right.
Like, you remember how we talked about how the Notre Dame USC game in 2017 was the no Moss game? That's what Saturday was for Ohio State and Michigan. Ohio State kids just got sick of getting punched in the mouth. And they quit. I don't say they quit, but they flinched.
Yes.
Right? They flinched. And I think that's the thing that is we saw a lot of conviction of, okay, yes, we are going to win this way. And that's what kind of gives me one of the reasons for optimism moving forward is because A, you can win that way. And B, Marcus Freeman showed that when we do what we believe in, we can be that kind of team. There's no doubt.
Well, it's process driven, right? We always talk about process, things being process versus the results driven. Yes, results was the word I was looking for. Brian, my favorite subject to teach when I was a teacher was math, because there are multiple ways to get to the end of a problem. That's the great thing about math, is that there's some people that can see things differently, they can solve things differently. But all I'll say is this, is that for Coach Freeman, he has identified the way that he needs to get to the end of the problem. He needs to get to the result. This is his process. Well, good luck getting to the end of good luck getting to the end of a long division problem if you don't know how to add and subtract, right? Like if you don't know the process of those things to get to the final result, final product, good luck getting there. And that's what I look like. That's what I'm continue to be so optimistic about this team, is that I think that there is a deep belief in this coaching staff from the top up, or the top down, I should say, about how we need to get there. And I also think Coach Freeman understands deeply, and I mean, we've talked about this a ton. I think he understands deeply that there are still a lot of improvements that need to happen with this program just from a talent perspective, right? He understands how important recruiting is, acquisition of talents, potentially in the portal in a couple of spots, continuing to bolster this roster on top of finding the process that works for each individual team. So I feel really, I'm I feel very optimistic about where this team can go. I do, because I think that there's, and we'll get into this a little bit, right, Brian? But like, there's a lot of younger players on this football team, a lot of core players that are going to be back next year that you look at and say, I can build off of what that kid showed me this year. There's a lot of coaches, both young and older, that you can look at on this team and say, that guy is heading in the right direction, and he has a core belief that is the same as the core standard up top. So again, optimistic. Does that mean that this season was a success from a win-loss perspective? Absolutely not. Both things can be the same, though, right?
Yeah.
It could be an unsuccessful season, but there's a baseline that is still being developed towards getting to your goals in the future. So I think we all need to understand that, is that us saying that we're still optimistic about the future does not give this season a pass. It's a bad start, right? 8-4 is not a good season for Notre Dame. 9-4 if they win the bowl game. But regardless, I still feel confident with where Coach Freeman is going and where this program is going, because I do think that everything he is doing is process driven, which gives me a lot of hope.
And I think that's a big key, Ryan. That's the thing that encourages me about kind of where they are with Marcus Freeman, is that I think he gets that. I do. I think watching him pissed off after the UNLV game, you'd have thought they lost 44-21. That told me something. Like, visibly upset after that game. Like, he was visibly pissed. Like, I have a picture of him singing the alma mater where he just looks like somebody kicked his dog. I mean, you know what I mean? Like, he was pissed.
That's the best part about how guys like Nick Saban are too, Brian, right? Like, even if they blow out a team, but he is not satisfied with the process to how they got there, it's not going to be acceptable to him, right?
And that's a good thing. I want a coach to be that way. I want a coach to kind of have that, it's not just about winning. It's about, did you play Notre Dame brand of football today? Mm-hmm. And I think that's what the great coaches are. We're going to find out if Marcus Freeman is a great coach or not. We don't, it's no matter what he would have done this year. If they'd have gone 12-0 in the regular season, it wouldn't have meant he's a great coach, because you could have said, well, he inherited an 11-1 team, you know what I mean, with some veteran players. I mean, Ryan Day is a perfect example. I have been saying for years, we won't really know who Ryan Day is until you get further and further away from, the Urban Meyer era. And we're seeing the further and further away they get from Urban Meyer, they don't play very good defense. They're not very physical, and they're a kind of a finesse team. That's not who Urban Meyer's teams were. They didn't win a championship in 2014 by being finessed. They won the championship in 2014 by running the ball down Alabama's throat. And they're not that team anymore, right? And so it takes time to learn, but I think the difference is that the lack of success in the record is going to allow Marcus. The one positive to that is you can kind of look at it and say, okay, I don't have to keep pretending like we're going to do it a certain way. We're going to now do it my way moving forward. And I think that's an important lesson. Again, it's not one that I would have rather him learn that by going 12-0, but or 11-1 at the very worst. But it's a lesson that you can be learned. And I think, Ryan, as we kind of look at the overall structure of the team, I think there's some areas where this year exposed that there are some areas that maybe they're a little closer than we thought they were. In some areas where, whether they are close or not, it's okay. It's very clear now that you need to step up and get better here. And I kind of want to just focus a little bit on that here for a few minutes. And I think, and I'll start kind of with a positive aspect of it. The positive aspect of it is, I think, some areas that were big question marks this season going into the campaign turned out to be major strengths. Biggest one being cornerback.
Mm-hmm.
The future at cornerback is incredibly bright.
Yeah.
Number one, all the people that were kind of questioning Mike Mickens, which I thought was kind of a little bit nutty when you consider what he was working with his first couple years, that was one position where the roster he inherited was not good.
Yeah.
And if you look at the secondary as a whole, if you don't have converted players and a transfer in Brandon Joseph, the secondary is a problem. If you don't move Cam Hart to corner from receiver, if you don't move Xavier Watts to safety from receiver, your depth chart's looking a little shaky right now.
Yep.
It just is. And so he's been able to kind of go recruit. He had a good first recruiting class. I still like that. People says the 2021 cornerback class a bust. It's like, no, it's just that the 22 class was way better. That happens sometimes, and then of course he's bringing another 2023 class that's excellent, and his coaching has always been good. I mean, Nick McLeod was a mediocre cornerback in the ACC in 2019 and 2018. In 2020, he was an all-conference guy. Why? So we're going Mike Mickens. Yeah, it really is as simple as that for me, Ryan. So cornerback is Benjamin Morrison. I thought he was going to be really, really good. I thought he had a potential to be a 3-year kid. I don't know if there was anybody outside of Mike Mickens and the Morrison family that was higher on Benjamin Morrison than me. And I still didn't think he was going to be this good this early.
Mm-hmm.
He even exceeded, so that's a positive. Cam Hart, the second half of the year was really good. And so you look at Tariq Bracy, how well he was able to get him past his sort of mental block that he was going through his first year and become what he was. Jaden Mickey went through some tough lessons this year, but also showed he's got some talent, because on TV you see the plays where he gets beat. What you don't see is the other plays where he's locking that dude down. Mm-hmm. And those are the areas where you say the future cornerback is going to be pretty good, especially if Cam Hart returns for his for the 2023 season. And so I think that's an area, Ryan, that you look at and say, that was considered a biggest question mark on the defense coming into the season.
Mm-hmm.
But by the end of the year, you could argue when Cam Hart and Tariq Bracy were in the lineup, you could make a strong case that the cornerback position was without question, the second half of the year at least, Notre Dame's best position group. I would argue that position group.
I mean, it's wild to kind of think where we are now compared to the preseason, because look, we could talk about Benjamin Morrison all day if we wanted to, right? The kid has 5 interceptions. He's been fantastic, has a starting role and potential freshman All-American in his first year. That's without a spring, by the way, folks. He didn't get here until the summer, right? Which is pretty wild to think about. So you're guaranteed to have him coming back. He's only a freshman, right? So you have at least 2 more years of him, potentially. You have him. If Cam Hart comes back, we'll see what happens with that conversation. I know that there's going to be a debate on, if he goes, if he leaves, whatever it ends up being. But if Cam Hart comes back, then you have potentially one of the best cornerback duos in all of college football next year on the outside. You're losing Tariq Bracy, which is going to be a loss. Of course, he's a really good football player, but you still have guys that you feel good about the potential. Clarence Lewis fitting inside a little bit more. Jaden Mickey, a year older. There's some guys, and not even counting the 2021 class, where you could still potentially have Philip Riley, Ryan Barnes, and Chance Tucker all back, right? I don't know if it's a foregone conclusion that they all come back, but you still have guys that have not exhausted eligibility. So you're really only losing one key player off of that unit if Cam Hart decides to come back. So you look at that roster, not only that, you also have Micah Bell coming in. You also have Christian Gray coming in. And
I just wanted to point out something real quick, Ryan. If those guys leave, and we're just having a conversation here, we're not saying they're going to leave.
Yeah.
It's because they got over-recruited.
Yes.
And that's not a bad place to be. I don't want any of those kids to leave. I like all those kids. I think they all have a chance to be good players in Notre Dame.
Yep.
And I hope they stay. But if they do leave, it's because they over-recruited them, and that shows a healthy roster. Well, that shows a healthy program, in my opinion.
And if you listen to us in the preseason, Brian, I was high on Ryan Barnes. I thought Ryan Barnes was going to be a good player for this team. I really did. I thought he could potentially be the starting corner opposite of Cam Hart. The fact that he got buried on the depth chart along with the other 2021 cornerbacks is not because they can't play. It's because the 2022 kids that came in can play, right? Again, we have a potential freshman All-American in that group in Benjamin Morrison. So having all that talent coming back on top of Micah Bell coming in, who might not be a first-year contributor on the defensive side of the football because he's still raw.
Right.
But long-term.
But he can freaking run.
Yes.
He can run.
Long-term, he's going to be an excellent football player for Notre Dame. But then you also have Christian Gray coming in, who is a guy that is pretty technically advanced for his age, right? That is going to come in during the spring and get to compete early on for potential reps. So you have another talented 2023 class coming in. Not to mention, you already have a kid in 2024 that's committed in Carson Hobbs, who's a pretty talented player as well. The cornerback room, not only for 2023, but the foreseeable future, as long as Mike Mickens is here and they continue to recruit at the level they do, is in a very good place. There's no question. I mean, like I said, Brian, you could argue if Cam Hart comes back and you have Cam Hart and Benjamin Morrison, I would put that up against just about any cornerback duo in all of college football. That is fantastic, man. That is a really great duo to build off of.
Well, I think to your point about that position group, and we'll do deeper dives in each position group moving forward, but you're going to have options next year for that third spot, and that's where you want to be. It's not like, well, if Jaden Mickey doesn't pan out, you're screwed. There's going to be options there. I think the running back depth chart, Ryan, we gave it a lot of hype. We caught a lot of flack early in the year. Remember, after a couple bad games, like, oh, you guys running your mouths about, top 5 running back group. I'm like, yeah, because they're supposed to block for the run game too. But I think what we saw by the end of the year is this is a very talented running back room. Very talented running back room. And it's only going to get better. You're going to get Jadarian Price back next year. You're bringing in 2 dudes. I had a stat today I put on the message board, Ryan. This is nuts. Jeremiah Love, in his last high school football game, a game in which his team won their second straight state championship, he had 19 carries in the championship game for 211 yards and 3 touchdowns. To make even more impressive, he had 3 catches for 106 yards and 1 touchdown or 2? Yeah, 1 or 2 catching. 2 catching. So you're talking about a kid who in the state championship game had 5 touchdowns, right?
Yep.
Here's the even crazier thing. He played in 8 playoff games in his career. 8 playoff games. In 2 of those games, he only had 1 carry and 3 carries because they blew out the same team 2 years in a row. So he played right. Yeah. But in those 8 playoff games, he had 1,022 rushing yards, averaged 11.1 yards per carry, and had 17 rushing touchdowns in 8 playoff games against a pretty good level of football. The best player on the other team that they beat, that he rushed for 211 yards against a team whose best defensive lineman is ranked by On3, I believe, as one of the top 5 players in the country in the 2024 class.
Yep.
And a kid who has a Notre Dame offer. And so you're going to, and because he's playing so well, no one's even talking about the monster season Jalen Lamar's having, right? So the future of that position is very bright. There's no question about it.
Not only that, Brian, to add to the Jeremiah Love thing, I think it was the game before they went against AJ Epinez's younger brother, who's one of the top 2025 kids in in that class. And then the game before that, he went against Christian Gray and the Smet Jesuit, right? So yes, he's playing dudes, man. He's not playing a bad level of competition in St. Louis. He's playing against some really good talent. Springfield is another team that he saw that we know is a really talented team out of the state of Ohio during the year. So yes, he's playing a very high level of competition, and he dominated anytime he got the football. Really, I mean, what was the stat against Vienna? He had 1 carry for 20-yard touchdown or something like that. It's like
it was like 1 carry for 20 yards, and it was ridiculous. And they were up they were up big, very.
And the craziest part is that a part of that running back room for the 2023 recruits that are committed to Notre Dame right now, Jeremiah Love didn't even have those touchdowns this past weekend, right? Jane Lamar had 6 touchdowns in their playoff win. So
nuts.
Adding that to Logan Diggs, Audric Estime, see what happens with Chris Tyree. We'll see what happens with that situation. But Jadarian Price coming back from injury, Jabron Payne in the room as well, who's a talented kid. That running back room, man, is going to be bananas over the next few years because we know that they're in a good place right now too with Aeneas Williams in the 2024 class. So they're going to continue to haul a lot of great running back talent over the next few years.
And I think the return of Harry Hiestand reminded us that Notre Dame did always have talent on the offensive line. It's not, it's still a process of getting them back completely where he wants them to be. There was some inconsistency this year, even late in the year, but you saw okay, they're a different deal when Harry Hiestand's back because there is talent there. That's a strong foundation. So there's a lot of areas where you feel good. And then there's some areas where, they took a step back, or at least maybe not took a step back, but maybe playing a tougher schedule made kind of expose some areas where maybe you're not good enough. And obviously,
Right.
quarterback is what we thought it was. I don't know if we. I mean, I can't. People say, "What's your grade on incomplete?" I mean, your starting quarterback played two not even two full games.
Mm-hmm.
He played good in one and terrible in the other. And
Yes.
that was it. His first two starts, and then. What we said before the year was, Drew Pine's going to win you a lot of games, but can he beat the best teams on your schedule? That's still debatable. I mean, he couldn't quite do enough to beat USC. Yes, he put up big yards, but he had two big turnovers that were a part of them losing that game. He did what he needed to do against Clemson. They didn't beat Clemson 35-14 because of Drew Pine's arm. So incomplete, it's a big question mark. It's an area where I think you've got to get better, and we'll have a show this week about the transfer portal and quarterback position and all that kind of stuff. But, I think an area where safety's got to have a big overhaul at safety. And I think linebacker, there's got to be some questions and answers found at linebacker this year. And I don't know if it's a personnel thing, if it's a scheme thing, if it's a little bit of both. But that was a position group that I didn't think played well. And I'm going to be honest about something too, Ryan.
Mm-hmm.
The defensive line, there was a hot debate on the board the other day. And somebody was like, oh, the defensive line was average. Like, that's nonsense. The defensive line was definitely not average. But I will say that the defensive line didn't play as well as it should have and could have. And I think that's a question mark that I have moving forward that needs to be addressed is, was it talent? Was it coaching? Was it a little bit of both? Was it learning a new system? What was it? Was it you played some good offensive line? I don't know what the answer is. But that was a position group that, again, there needs to be a rational conversation on this. Going to the extreme, they weren't that good. They were average or slightly above. No, that's wrong. But they also weren't the elite group they could and should have been, and at least not consistently. When they were on, they dominated games.
Yep.
But it was way too up and down, and that's the thing that in previous years with Mike Elson, they had the same highs where they would just dominate, but the lows were never like what we saw this year from the defensive line. That's something that needs to be addressed too. And so these are all things that Marcus Freeman needs to look at as you head into the offseason and say, in the two of the three biggest games we played, the bookends, when the game was on the line, we couldn't stop the run. Ohio State in the opener and USC at the end of the year. And everybody can talk about CJ Stroud and Caleb Williams and all that stuff, but you lost those games because you couldn't stop the run.
No, Mayan Williams won that football game for Ohio State. CJ Stroud made a few good plays, right?
Yeah, he made some really clutch throws, but
that offensive line and Mayan Williams in the fourth quarter wore down the Notre Dame defense. He did. And then Austin Jones was the X factor in this football game against USC. And what do you have, like 150 yards? Like, it was ridiculous. It didn't make any
and they rushed
sense.
for over 200 yards in that game as a team.
Yeah. That was the difference. We knew that Caleb Williams was going to make some plays because he's a fantastic player. But the fact that and I said this before the game, if Notre Dame wasn't able to stop the run against a team that I didn't consider a great running team, that's a bad sign, right? Like, that's a really bad sign. So I think that you point to that, Brian, when Notre Dame had its complete games, I would argue that's when the linebackers played their best, right? When the linebackers played bad football, they usually didn't play very well.
When
the
Notre Dame box played well, Ryan, you could not beat this team.
Yeah, you couldn't even be
competitive against this team, Ryan. North Carolina couldn't be competitive against Notre Dame because the box played well. Right. Clemson couldn't be competitive against Notre Dame because the lines in the box played well. Both lines in the box played well.
Yep.
They didn't against USC, and they lost.
Yep.
Right, and that's something that's got to be addressed. It's got to be addressed.
And for defensive line wise, right, people are going to talk about, size of defensive tackles, and we'll have all those conversations during the offseason, right? Like, we'll continue to talk about that. But for me, it's going to be a very interesting offseason for Al Washington, because you came into the season this year and you're like, there's a lot of talent there, right? Isaiah Foskey is talented as you will find in college football just about. Jason Adamalola obviously was coming off of a pretty strong 2021 season. So you're like, okay, taking the next step, those guys are going to be dudes. And then you have a bunch of nice complementary pieces, the Justin Adamalolas, the Howard Crosses of the world, the ascension of Gabriel Rubio, because he took a pretty nice step, I thought, throughout the majority of this season. But it was really, Isaiah Foskey was still good, but I didn't feel like he took a step, right? Like he was still a good player, like he has been over the last couple of years. Still very good player when he's playing his best football, but he wasn't great this year, right? Like he didn't
Not
take that step.
consistently.
Exactly. Through the course of an entire season, I feel like he didn't take a step forward. Jason's a little bit of a different story because he was banged up throughout the year and all that good stuff. But, some of the guys that you were expecting to take big steps for Notre Dame didn't. And there's always a variety of reasons. I just mentioned Jason Adamalola had a little bit of some nagging injuries and such throughout the season. So it's not all on the coach, but this is an offseason where now I say, all right, Al, it wasn't a great first year developing that defensive line, so it needs to be better in year 2, right? Like you need to take a step forward, and you're not going to have Isaiah Foskey most likely. You're not going to have Jason Adamalola, so you don't have the dudes anymore, right? So this next offseason really comes down
the proven
to
dudes, right?
Yes, the understood.
Because I was gonna push back a little bit on having dudes.
Oh, no.
But
no.
established, correct. Yes. We're on the same page.
You're still going to have plenty of talent. You're going to have Riley Mills coming back, most likely. You're going to have Joshua Burnham in his second year. You're going to have Aiden Gobira. There's still going to be
Tyson
plenty
Ford,
of
as you mentioned, Gabriel Rubio. Jason Onye is a guy that people talk about keeping an eye on. Jordan Patelho should be back. Plus, you've got a really good D-line class coming in with a couple guys that are going to be capable of pushing early on. But you got to find out answers, because that's part of what an offseason is okay, why could – here's one. I'm gonna have an article this season or this week about this. The Notre Dame run game, when it was on this year, it was really good. When it wasn't, there was no happy medium. There was the Stanford game where they rushed for 150. Outside of that, it was either 220 plus or sub 100 late in the year. Like that you can't have those highs and lows. Address why. What were the reasons why? Was it schematic? Was it preparation? Was it play calling? Was it execution? Was it not having a pass game threat? Was it formational? Like, those are all parts of what you need to do. And those are parts of what you need to do before the bowl game.
Right.
Because that's what you have 15 practices to work on that stuff leading up to another game. And I think that's an important part too, is a lot of stuff that we're talking about is stuff that needs to be addressed before the bowl game. Yes. You don't, let's just keep doing what we've been doing the next 15 practices. It's like, hey, look, we've got a couple weeks here before we really got to dive into bowl prep. Kids are going to have finals and all that other kind of stuff. Let's spend some time. You can't go on the road till next week, till Friday, so let's spend some days diving into film, and start talking about some of these issues, and then see what can be addressed now, what needs to be do we have to wait until the offseason to address? I think those are all parts of it. So, and then they've got to get their kicking situation figured out too, because obviously Blake Grupe was okay, but not good enough. Is Josh Bryan the answer if healthy? If not, do you need to go to the portal again for another kicker? Did a great job of punter with John Sott. They feel really good from people I've talked to. They feel really good about Bryce McPherson's future. It was nice to have John Sott as that bridge, especially when Bryce got hurt. So you feel like you've got your punter of the future, but, the kicker's got to get figured out. You're losing your long snapper, and Michael Vincent, I believe, is done after this year. So, and he was excellent. I mean, so there's question marks about this team, Ryan, that are going to have to get addressed. But at the end of the day, there's some areas to build around, and I think that's why the defensive line is so important. Is you've got the offensive line. You feel like, okay, this is going to be pretty good. All right, you could argue that. I mean, I would make a case that in the last, I'll just say it, and if you disagree, I'd love to hear who you think it is. My comment is, my belief is, after breaking down the film, that we know the tackles are really good. Notre Dame's best interior lineman in the last 7 weeks was Zeke Correll, not Jarrett Patterson.
I wouldn't argue
consistently.
Against it. I feel like you can have an argument for Zeke. I feel like you can have a hard argument for Jarrett, and I would not push.
And I think at times you can make an argument for Josh Lugg. In a couple games, Josh Lugg was very good. My thing is not he was better in every individual game. It's that he was consistently better. Now, part of that was Jarrett was playing with injuries all year. And so that's not a shot at Jarrett at all. I mean, I love that kid's attitude. I love that kid's heart that he battled through injuries. It was just production-wise, I felt like Zeke was consistently their best interior lineman. He's coming back.
Yes.
Your tackles are coming back. There's a lot of young talent that you feel good about on the offensive line. So I feel like the offensive line, I feel good there. You're losing Michael Mayer. He's a star. I feel they're going to be okay there, right? The defensive line.
to the offensive line point, real quick, Brian, I would also say your 2 tackles and your center, like those are the 3 most important positions on an offensive line, man. Like you can figure out guard, you can kind of manufacture, and you can even put some band-aids on the guard position at times. You can, but center and the both tackle positions, I think, is paramount to having answers for, and you have answers going into next season. So I just want to add a little bit of context to how important it is to have in those 3 positions specifically.
Yeah. I think when you look at the defensive line, I think that's where I feel like there needs to be a much bigger conversation about how they're going about their business, right? With the offensive line, it's like keep doing what you're doing and, figure out some things to be more consistent with it. But I even against USC, I don't really look at that game and say they couldn't run the ball because of things the line was doing. USC was basically saying, we're not going to let you run. We're going to throw 8 guys at you the entire game. And we're going to do these things to kind of make it hard for you to run the football. And we're going to make you beat us with your arm. And simply put, Drew couldn't do it. And the offense couldn't do it. It was not just Drew, but yeah, the numbers 23 of 26, 318 yards and all that, but they needed 2 more plays to be made that they couldn't make. And that's the difference. And that's why USC said, we're going to make you beat us that way. We're not going to let your line and your running backs beat us. We're not. So that was part of it. Defensive line wise, I think is where there needs to be an even bigger discussion about why were we not better?
Yeah.
And if it's talent, if the talent's not as good as we think, okay, then you better recruit better than you did, because Al Washington, and we had a super chat about this from Michael S., who loves beating up on Al Washington, but he said with a super chat, he said in season assessment of Washington and the D line, and that's kind of what we're getting at is you weren't, not only are you not great, but you also lost Keon Keeley. Yes. You lost out on Jason Moore. You did a nice job flipping Armel Mookum, but
we'll see. And this is not against Al Washington yet, Brian, but I mean, if it seems like they were very late in the 2024 class to Justin Scott, right?
A kid right down the street, right?
If he ends up at a different school, which we'll see what happens, that would also be another kind of like blemish on your record, right? Because that's a kid that you should get 10 out of 10 times. That's that type of kid.
Right. And so that's a question mark, Ryan. I mean, they were right there early on. Nigel Smith, Elijah Rushing. Now they seem to be kind of fading with those kids.
Yeah.
So that's a big question mark, right? And that's something that has to get discussed and addressed. And so I feel like there's some areas where what the next step for Coach Freeman of growth is going to be, okay, you showed you can handle certain things in season. You also showed areas where you need to grow as a coach, admittedly grow as a coach. The next step is, okay, how do you look at your team and make fixes? Right. Because what the easy thing to do, and I think the lazy thing to do, is to just automatically go to fire this guy and move on to somebody else. I think, fire Tommy Rees, fire Al Washington, fire Al Golden, or how about you guys sit down and come up with a different plan, or challenge people to do better, or work harder, or change strategy, or adjust, things like that. It's not always about, fire this guy. Perfect example, Mac Brown. They were running an offense early in his career at Texas. It's pro style, fullback, tailback, 2 receivers, tight end, and it was good enough for them to go 9-3, 10-2 every year, right? They couldn't beat Oklahoma, and they couldn't win the big games. So what did he do? They completely changed their offense, went to a spread. Now, do you know the name of the spread coach he went out and hired to replace Greg Davis as offensive coordinator? No, you don't, because he didn't. Greg Davis adapted, stayed the offensive coordinator, and they went out and won a title, played for another in a year where I still contend and will always contend that if Colt McCoy doesn't get hurt, they beat Bama. It's my contention. And so no way to prove it, but that's just what I believe. It was a somewhat competitive game with Garrett Gilbert as the quarterback for a while. You know what I mean? But anyway, those things have to get addressed. And then if a guy doesn't make the changes, that's when you move on, but it's not always just, fire guys, because you don't want to build that reputation as a coach. Like you have one bad year and, this guy was hurt, that guy was hurt, right. This kid quit in the middle of the year because he wasn't going to have playing time. And, it's not always easy, Ryan, to just say, fire a guy. That's.
I know we kind of spent a lot of time talking about the defensive line. I'm also curious about the linebackers this offseason, Brian, because you have 3 coaches on this team right now one defensive coordinator, now Golden, who literally was just a very good linebacker coach on the NFL level. You have Marcus Freeman, who played the position and has made his living coaching the position at a high level. And then you have James Laurinaitis, although his coaching career is very limited, he still has seen linebacker play at the highest level, from Ohio State to the St. Louis Rams at the time, right? So you have three guys that know the linebacker position. And that's a position, defensive line-wise. We can have a conversation if maybe talent needs to be better in some spots, and we can have that conversation.
And
linebacker,
it does.
Yes. Linebacker, you can't really have that conversation. Right. You really can't, especially with the class that's coming in on top of the 2022 group that is already there, and Jalen Sneed. And I know Joshua Byrne doesn't count there, but Junior Tuihalamaka, Nolan Ziegler, adding in the guys that you are now with Drake
Prince
Bowen,
Colley is still young.
Prince Colley, who's an incredibly talented player, Jay Nosberry, Preston Zinter coming in. Linebacker talent is not going to be an issue coming into next season. It's not. It's going to be a big question on me if it is scheme driven. Then I'm looking forward to seeing if the scheme changes a little bit, or the philosophy, I guess, a part of the scheme that unlocks guys like Maris Loithal and J.D. Bertrand potentially and Jack Kaiser to play better football than they did consistently this year. But I will also say this, Brian, if it doesn't happen and it ends up that it's a talent issue up top, then it's going to be a big indicator for me to see how quickly the coaches make the changes and put the talent on the field. So regardless if it's a coaching issue or a talent issue at linebacker, something needs to change this offseason. I'm interested to see if it changes and how it changes specifically.
So for me, Ryan, it's one of those things where the reason that the linebacker and D-line positions are such a concern, and linebacker much more so than the defensive line, is because you can question the talent all you want, but my point would be if Jack Kaiser and J.D. Bertrand were simply the same dudes they were a year ago, we're having a different conversation about linebacker. Then I'd say Maris has got to play a little bit better. But they all regressed. And that's the concern for me. Is same thing with offensive line, or defensive line. We saw regression from some players. And that's a concern. We saw statistical regression, I believe, from Justin Adamiola, although I thought his play was really good. And it was okay. So why was that? Were they not using him correctly? Because I mean, he played a bunch more, and he played with a great motor, and he played hard, and all those other kind of things. But what was the reason for it? Was he not given enough opportunities? What was the case for it? And so the regression is the concern for me that needs to be addressed. And that's the challenge for Marcus Freeman. And it starts now. It's got to start now. It's got to start before the bowl game, right? Because I'll say this is a big bowl game for Notre Dame. I don't know who they're going to play or what game they're going to play in, but they have to win this game, because 9-4 with a win going into the offseason is very, very different than 8-5 going into the offseason with 2 straight losses. I'm going to tell you that right now. People may not think it matters. It matters. It matters a ton. And so you've got to start addressing some of those things now, and that's the next challenge for Coach Freeman. That's part of the fun of coaching too, is like, okay, here's what we did. Let's go get better. And that's true even when you're good. And so I think that's the next step. That's the next unknown about Coach Freeman, is how is he going to handle the offseason. One thing we learned last year was there were so few leaks about the coaching search. He really kept that stuff close to the vest, like to the point where we were thinking that Del Alexander might be coming back, because there was just no rumblings about it one way or the other. And then come to find out that was never going to happen. And so you don't really know what he's going to do. And then all of a sudden, wow, it's like, oh, this is the move, right? And then like running back, it wasn't until right before he got hired that there was even the inkling of Dylan McCullough being the candidate. Like, we were hearing other names, right? And early on, that it wasn't happening. And same with other things, other position hires, where you're like, wow, where'd that one come from, right? Like, The only one that seemed obvious was the Al Washington one. That was just because of the connection that they had. But like special teams, there was a ton of rumblings about who the special teams coach was going to be, and it was rarely, if ever, mentioned that it would be Brian Mason. So it was really fascinating to see how that all played out. But
shout out to Coach Mason also for being named one of the finalists for the Special Teams Coach of the Year, man. Shout out to him.
He should get it. Kickers might do him in, though.
I didn't see Brian Polian on that list. So
yeah, it's because he stinks. Yeah, I'll just come out and say it. But anyway, I want to see him start addressing those things now. That's going to be a big key. And here's another thing that has me sort of excited about the future of this program. Ryan, you mentioned it earlier, and we'll kind of wrap up with this part before we go into the mailbag. The youth on this football team is really talented. Like, not even talking about the 23 team, just the talent that's there now. You look at the freshman class, like we talked about this. Looking at one play and using that to build your entire belief system is not a good idea. And I'm not doing that. For me, it's more of a, it's confirmation of what I already believed, if I'm being honest. But when you go back and watch that last play of the BC game and you watch Aiden Goldbyra just rocking the offensive tackle back, and you watch Jalen Sneed just firing to the football. And then earlier in that game, just shooting that dude. When you watch Nolan Ziegler's sideline speed, when you watch Josh Burnham just flying off the backside, you start saying, boy, future's pretty good right now. I thought Tyson Ford did some nice things in that game. First action we've seen from him. You look at Tobias Merriweather. Deion Colsey had a breakout towards the end of the year. The running backs everybody praises and loves are sophomores. Your starting receiving core basically by the end of the year was sophomores. And then Tobias Merriweather, you've got Mitchell Evans as a sophomore, Eli Raridan, Holden Stace are freshmen. Benjamin, your best DB this year, was a freshman, and the future. And then of course you're bringing in one of the 3 best recruiting classes in the entire country next season. So that's the biggest thing for me is there is still an element of, and this was always my argument, Notre Dame always should have been better than they were, but I've never felt that they were, never argued that they were on the same level as Bama and Georgia talent-wise. It's at some positions they are, but you're good enough to beat those teams on any given Saturday if you do what you need to do, right? And that's kind of look, does anyone want to argue with me that Ohio State's going to have more, or Michigan's going to have more first-round draft picks from their current roster than Michigan will? I don't think that, or that Michigan will have
Ohio
more first-round picks than Ohio State. I don't think that's going to happen. I mean, I keep hearing people talk about, this guy, but who's kicked whose butts the last 2 years?
Yeah.
Right. And so, the talent is such that, and even if it's equal numbers in draft picks, the games haven't been competitive, Ryan.
No.
They've had about a half of competitive football in the last 2 years. That's it.
Yep.
That's it. And that was with Michigan calling them out for an entire year. Mm-hmm. Michigan ran their mouths and called them out, and Ohio State, and still went out and punked Ohio State on Saturday. It was worse than last year. It was a worse beating than last year, in my opinion. Physical beating.
Yeah.
So that the point is, you don't have to have superior talent to play with those teams.
Sure.
You just have to have certain attributes, but the talent still has to be close enough. And that's the exciting thing is there's just dudes, and we've said this before, there's dudes on this roster in the freshman and sophomore classes that just look and move different than what we're used to.
Yep.
And when we have seen guys move like Jalen Sneed, they've been guys that have gone on to be stars. Now, will Jalen? I don't know. We'll have to find out because there's a lot more to it than just ability. Mm-hmm. But the fact that you can look at the young talent and say, boy, there's some really good young players, and the best recruiting class of all is going to come in. This team's going to have a chance to be something special. If you can address those concerns that we have and get this thing moving forward. Those people ask, why are you excited? Why are you excited about the season after 8-4? It's that stuff. Because what do we always say? You can walk and chew gum at the same time. You can be disappointed with the outcome of the season, but still look at things and say, I'm excited about this. Mm-hmm. Right? We saw that from the 2014 season. Yeah, the season ending sucked. But you could look at that and say, but boy, when that team was right, they were pretty good. And a lot of those dudes are coming back next year.
Yep.
All right. And then they went out and had a pretty good year. But at the same time, you were able to see a team that went 10-3 the year before. I had some complaints about that season, and I said that off season before the 2016 season. I said there's a lot of issues with this football team. They're either gonna be really good or they're gonna implode. Right? Called that before the season. Why? Because it's not always about looking at the result and assuming that it was a good or a bad thing.
Mm-hmm.
It was there were flaws there, but the talent masked it.
Yeah.
Right. And with this, I feel like there's a good foundation has been laid, Ryan. And when you look at the foundation, and now it's got to be tweaked and improved upon, no doubt. But the foundation I feel that was laid this year is strong. There were some bumps on the road. There were some mistakes that were made. There's some improvements that need to be made. But the fact of the matter is the foundation was strong. And when you start looking at the young talent that's emerging and coming in, that's where you start getting really excited about what this team can be. If Coach Freeman can just make the right tweaks to this football team and sometimes it's not even a tweak, it's just a flat out change. But if he can make those things, and that sometimes can be the hardest thing to do, Ryan, is someone that you know and care about, letting them come in and either saying, hey, this needs to change, or you're going to be gone, or saying you're gone. That's the hardest part of being a head coach. And I'm not saying he needs to do that. I'm just saying there's going to come a time every coach has to fire somebody or tell someone you better do a better job or you will be fired. Those are tough conversations to have, but that's part of being a head coach. Sure. And I'm not saying fire people, but there are some people that need to be put on notice that if this doesn't change, and I've got you, I'm watching you now. These next 15 practices are sort of an evaluation for you. I do think that conversation needs to be had with a couple people, or at least if you don't have it, make comments to where they kind of know, like that's not good enough. And that's going to be the thing. If we're going to learn it, if he's able and willing to do that, to me, that's the final piece, because we know he's going to recruit his butt off. We know he can get a team to play with physicality and toughness more often than not. But can he do that final step? That's going to be the thing that separates him from being a good coach, which I'm confident he will be, or a great coach, which he has the potential to be, but we need to see certain things first.
Yep. I mean, I think that the staff is definitely replenishing and finding talent, though, right? I mean, to your point, I mean, the young talent on this roster, just kind of circling back to your initial point, Brian, it's not just the fact that there's a lot of promising players of the younger group. It's the fact that a lot of these younger players that will be back with Notre Dame next year are budding stars.
Right.
Like, it's not that they're just solid
star
potential
players.
Like Joe Alt is going to go into next season as the potential. I'll just tell you from the NFL draft perspective, everyone's going to be talking about Joe Alt potentially being offensive tackle 1 in the 2024 NFL draft. They're going to talk about it.
And it's not a given, Ryan, that he's going to be their best offensive tackle next year.
It's not. Again, if Blake Fisher has a big offseason, man, and he takes a nice step, like he's another kid that's going to be talked about a lot in NFL circles next year. The two running backs, Audric Estime and Logan Diggs, that you expect back, are on the cusp of being stars. They are, man. They had star moments this year for sure.
And as you said yesterday in your show, it's not a given that either one of them are going to be the most physically talented running back on the roster next year, or even in the top 2. Ryan.
Well, that's the great thing too, Brian, is that the secondary was playing pretty well before Benjamin Morrison really broke out, right? Like he played against Ohio State, but I would say still, if Clarence Lewis is the other starting corner throughout the majority of the season, the secondary is still good, right? Like there would have been still a good secondary this year. But next year, if Jeremiah Love plays a lot, it's because Jeremiah Love is a dude. If Jaden Lamar plays a lot, it's because Jaden Lamar is too talented to keep off the field, right? Like those two guys have the opportunity to be a Benjamin Morrison, where like, do you technically need him? Not entirely, but the fact that he's so good, you can't keep him off the field at that point, right? Like that's the difference. So I think there's a lot of those players in the 2023 class, like Peyton Bowen is just probably going to be too good to keep off the field next year. You know, if he ends up with no.
He's going to be too good to keep out of the starting lineup next year.
That's what I'm saying.
Yes.
Even though Charles Jagasaw is not going to be an early enrollee, Charles Jagasaw is so talented that I wouldn't be shocked if he plays some at guard next year. Right. Maybe not in a full-time capacity, but inks some opportunities because he's so good, because he's such a talented football player. And there's guys littered across. Like, would it be shocking to you if Drake Bowen or Jaden Osbury play as freshmen, despite them being a part of a really deep linebacker group? Like, it's very possible, right? So there's guys throughout this 2023 class that are coming in on top of this sophomore class of this year that we saw a lot of guys take massive steps. Talk about next year having Tobias Merriweather coming back from the concussion issues. Hopefully he takes a big step in the offseason. Deion Colsey as a sophomore had a nice little breakout towards the end of the season. The scary part about Benjamin Morrison is we haven't even seen close to as good as he can be, right? Like we just saw the freshman version of him. He can get even better, which is Yeah. So to your point, the staff's going to have a lot of talent to work with. Now from there, I mean, they need to make adjustments and they need to get everybody up to their potential, but there's a lot to feel very optimistic about next year and throughout because recruiting isn't stopping, man. Even with the struggles, they're still pulling in a lot of talented kids.
You never know, Ryan. We may have an extra show this week.
You
never know. You never know. We're going to end it on that. I think Ryan said it perfectly. We're going to obviously spend this entire next however many months breaking this team down every capacity. But I did want to kind of take a look at just sort of a post-mortem, so to speak, on the regular season. And I think it's very important that the lessons that need to be learned get learned now and start being applied for the bowl prep. I think that's very important for this football team. So I'm very interested to see how that's going to go. We're going to do a mailbag next. So don't go because we have some very interesting questions coming up. Hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, hit the notification bell, share this podcast. We would also greatly appreciate if you sign up for the message boards at boards.irishbreakdown.com and check out our website at irishbreakdown.com. Let's dive into this mailbag because we do have some good questions here. If you have some more questions, let's throw them in there. I have now seen in the chat 3 different quarterbacks projected to Notre Dame in the portal. So we will have a show on that. We'll have a portal show this week. I'm also going to do an article that's going to sort of be redone every time a quarterback that I like enters the portal. I'm going to look at some guys. I'm going to break them down. Are they good fits or not for Notre Dame? And so I'll probably have that starting tomorrow. And then as new guys hit the portal that I like, we'll add them to it and just kind of
portal report. I like that. I like that.
Well, quarterback is the main one. My first article is going to be, here's the needs in the portal. Here's where they need to look. And then I'll kind of, because quarterback's the big one. If they only get a quarterback in the portal this year and he's a kid that can play, that's success. Like if give me even just another Jack Cohn. Right. And obviously that's my opinion of Jack Cohn. Right. I mean, other people don't think it's highly of Jack Cohn. I did. And I'll take this to my grave, Ryan. Jack Cohn's Notre Dame starting quarterback this year. They're at worst 11-1. Like that's no disrespect to Drew, but it was a combination of he could run Tommy's offense. He was a veteran. You know, he'd been through all of that stuff. He could have been able to handle some of the tough spots. He showed last year, love Tyler's talent, but Jack makes those fourth quarter throws that Tyler didn't hit because he's done it before. He's been through those battles. He's been through those wars. He missed those throws early in his career, like a lot of young quarterbacks make, and then he learned from it and got better at it. So, but you know, you need to get a guy that can come in and just be a really good player. In my opinion, is the ideal situation. But we're gonna discuss that and wrap that up. So, Ryan Woolridge says, "What happens?" Thank you for the super chat, Ryan. He said, what happens if both quarterbacks for the Pack get hurt? Let's talk about NC State on that one. Ryan, I would love to answer your question, but I'm just not quite sure are you referring to. I'm going to assume he's talking about NC State because they're down to 2 quarterbacks, right? I mean,
I guess.
Because MJ Morris was banged up, and then they had the Finley kid
Ben
playing.
Finley. Yeah, Ben Finley was
in the bowl game. I mean, you're going to have to find somebody on your team that can take a snap and hand the ball off. I mean, that's really what it boils down to.
Yeah.
But if you're talking about something else, Ryan, please let me know, and because I want to make sure that I'm answering your question.
I'm sure they have an emergency quarterback ready, somebody that played it in high school.
Most teams do. Yeah, most teams will do that. Good team, well-coached teams will anyway. David Hess with a super chat. I love the heart this team showed. Thank you very much, David, by the way, for your super chat. I really do appreciate that. I love the heart this team showed this year. Here's hoping for that 9th win and onward to next year. Thanks for all the content, guys, at IB. I'm going to say this, Ryan.
Mm-hmm.
Heart's not enough, right? You got to play well and win games. However, what he's saying here is part of the foundation I'm talking about. Like there is no spinning that this was a successful season. We're not going to do that. Mm-hmm. What this show is about is, in spite of it being a disappointing season, there was a lot of stuff that you can build off of to make you excited for what they're going to do. And what I'm going to bring up after David's question to tie into David's question to get to it is, it's not unheard of for a coach to kind of not do well his first year and then do things really well. And so, but if the heart's not there, if you've got, I've always felt this as a coach, Ryan, and I know you've coached a little bit too. Mm-hmm. If a kid is a hard worker and even sometimes plays too hard or too out of control, or, I can work with that. Mm-hmm. But if I got a kid who doesn't want to work, a kid who doesn't have the right attitude, that's harder to fix because
Yes.
that's an inside here problem for that kid that I can't get into that. If a
Mm-hmm.
kid's a hard worker and has the heart, it's like the story I love hearing about Lou Holtz. I think it was after the bowl game. I think if I remember correctly, somebody else might be able to prove me wrong. It was after the bowl game that they lost in 80s after the 87 season, I believe, because Notre Dame lost their final 3 games of the year that year. And there's a story that Lou Holtz came in and he goes in the locker room, and it might have been after the 86, like the last game of the 86 season. I can't quite remember. Some of the others can maybe point that out and help me remember that one. Basically, he walks into the locker room, and there's this one of his players is sitting there sobbing after the loss.
Mm-hmm.
It was Chris Zorich. Problem is, Chris Zorich didn't play in the game, but he hurt that much. He loved that team so much that he was just sobbing in the locker room after a loss that he didn't even play in. And he was like, "That's the kind of kid I want on my football team." Right. And that's the thing is, if the heart is there, if the willingness to work is there, we can fix, as a coach, we can fix all the other things. Looking at it from a coaching standpoint, I can fix the practices. I can work on this. I can improve this. I can make a change here if the foundation is strong. Right. If the willingness to put in the work is there, then it's up to me to fix those things. If I have kids that don't want to be here, then you're Texas A&M.
Yep. Or Miami right now.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And we never saw that from Notre Dame this year. Mm-hmm. And that's the important. And they had multiple chances to quit. They had multiple chances to have veterans, Isaiah Foskey and Michael Mayer. If they would have, after Stanford, said, "I'm done," people wouldn't have liked it, but people would have understood.
Yep.
And not only did they not do that, they doubled down and played their butts off in the next several games. Like Isaiah Foskey bounced back from what was arguably the worst game of his career with one of the best games of his career the next week. And he was also really good against Clemson the week after that. That tells me something about the heart of him and his football team.
And he played his butt off against USC, man.
Yes.
He played his butt off against USC.
Yes. Yeah. That says something about not only Isaiah Foskey, but where this team is.
And how Michael Mayer improved as a blocker is an example that we've given during the season.
No reason. He had no reason to do so. Nobody in the NFL was going to care much about that.
No,
but
he's still going to win the first round.
He knew it's what he needed to do to win because this was going to be a running football team. And it says a lot about that. Jarrett Patterson would have had every reason to, and Marcus Freeman said this, to say, "Hey, I'm not playing. I'm injured. I got too many injuries. I can't do it." But he answered the bell every single game once he came back.
I always point to another good example too, Brian, for Michael Mayer is it was the Cal game, right? Where Pines airmailed that one where it's wide open.
Oh, the seam route.
Yeah. Yes. And instead of Michael Mayer going on the sideline and sulking and being to himself and just saying, "Drew, you suck, get away from me," he goes right to Drew Pine to pick him up, right? And a lot of pass catchers would have just been like, "Dude, you suck. Get somebody else in here that can make that throw." And instead, he was the ultimate teammate, the consummate teammate, and was there to pick up his quarterback, which I think it speaks volumes to the player. And that was the week after they just lost to Marshall, right? Like that's yes.
Yep. Now that ties into another question that we had down here from Siggy13. And he says, now that the regular season is done, is there a first-year coach in memory from anywhere in football that was similar to Freeman and might give us foresight into where this can go? I'm going to give you a couple polar opposite examples. Number one, I think the most direct example is Kirby Smart. And obviously, his first year at Georgia, they went 8-5. They went 8-4 in the regular, or 7-5 in the regular season. Lost to Ole Miss 45-14. Lost at home to Tennessee 34-31. Lost to Vanderbilt. Lost to Georgia by 2 touchdowns, and then got beat by Georgia Tech at the end of the season. Went into the bowl game, beat TCU 31-23, and the next year they played for national championship. Beat Notre Dame, played for national championship. Dabo Swinney needed 2 years to really get going. His first year, they went 9-5. His second year, they went 6-7. Third year, they went 10-4. By year 4, they were the top 10 team back-to-back years. So, I mean, that was a similar example, a little bit different. And then another example, the one that kind of probably means, I think, is probably the most direct to Marcus Freeman based on who he stepped in for. But, you know, he inherited a team at Ohio State that went 8-4, right? Lost 4 of their last 7 games to ranked teams. Lost to number 16 Purdue, lost to number 19 Michigan, lost to number 14 South Carolina. Lou Holtz coached South Carolina team. And then the next year, Jim Tressel steps in and he goes 7-5. including losing their bowl game. They were 7-4 going into the bowl game and lost a bowl game to South Carolina. And so you go into that and 7-5. That's his year. And he was a guy that had experience, but he was at FCS. He was at Youngstown State. Is this really? Yeah, they beat Michigan that year, but what do they do the next year, Ryan? They go out and win a national championship and beat one of the greatest collections of talent I've ever seen in my life in that Miami team.
It was ridiculous, man.
And of course
Frank Gore was like a third string running back on that team.
Exactly. That team. I mean, that team was insane. Like the year before on that team, you had Willis McGahee playing fullback. Right? Wasn't DJ Williams a fullback on the team? A guy that eventually became a starting linebacker in the National Football League, was a first-round draft pick for the Broncos.
Yeah, he was a stud.
Right?
He was a really good linebacker.
He was playing fullback on that team, I believe. And so that, I mean, but it was about the foundation was laid in year one.
Mm-hmm.
The foundation of toughness. What was the big knock on John Cooper? Couldn't win the big game.
Yeah.
Good teams just couldn't win the big game. And that was a knock on Brian Kelly. Right. And now John Cooper's records weren't as good as Brian Kelly's because the Big Ten was really good back then. And if you weren't good, you weren't going to go 11-1 against a soft schedule like Brian Kelly had last year.
Yep.
So I think it's one of those things but the foundation was laid during that 7-5 season, Ryan.
Mm-hmm.
You look at that team, they had a tough loss at UCLA early in the year. They lost at home to Wisconsin by 3. They lost at to Penn State by 2, lost to Illinois at home by 12, beat Michigan on the road. And then, all the momentum from that game is gone because they lost to South Carolina in a bowl game. But again, they had some really talented young players, and he laid a foundation of toughness. This is how we're going to compete. And he didn't waver from that. And then the next year, with some tweaks, they went out and won a national championship. Now, I'm not saying they're going to do that, but there are plenty of examples of that happening in college football. Yep. And I'm sure if I spent 10 minutes, I could think of more.
Mm-hmm.
So there's clearly more. I mean, it didn't take Nick Saban very long to get that Alabama team turned around, but what he was willing to sacrifice losing to Louisiana Monroe because he was trying to do something bigger than right now. And I think that's the part that we talked about earlier that was so important is Marcus Freeman probably could have made some tweaks to this team that might have actually allowed them to score a little more or make a few more stops, but they'd have been short-term fixes. And they would have just masked the problems that existed. But he didn't do that. He said, no, we're doing something bigger. Our season's already, we're not playing for a championship. That's been done since September 10th. So now it's about we're building for the future while also trying to win all the games this year. I'm not saying they sacrifice wins this year. I'm not saying that at all. But what I'm saying is he wasn't willing to sacrifice this is who we're going to be for short-term success. And there's going to be some bumps in the road. And that's something that I think was smart. And that's something that his mentor did there. And Lou Holtz is similar. And Lou Holtz won 5-6 in his first year. And the next year, Notre Dame comes out and started really, really well. I think they started, if I remember correctly, Ryan, I think they started 8-0, I believe, in 87. No, 8-1. They were 8-1. They lost at Pittsburgh, but they beat number 9 Michigan on the road. They beat number 17 Michigan State. I'm saying this one for Ladarius's for his benefit. They beat number 10 Alabama 37-6, and they climbed all the way up to number 7 that next year, and then they lost their next 3 games. And Lou Holtz never wavered from his foundation, but he said, I'm going to find people that want to be here. He didn't change. He said, no, this is who we are. And if you don't want to be here, go somewhere else. Because the guys that I'm playing next year are the guys who are going to do what we were saying to do. And that's what I felt like we saw go happen this year at Notre Dame.
Yep.
Is that. And that's what we're going to see this offseason. There's going to be some heart-to-hearts with kids saying, hey, if you don't want to buy into this, I love you and appreciate everything you've done, but this isn't the place for you. And I think that's one of the other things that has me kind of optimistic about what's the future holds.
Okay.
Got a couple more here, Ryan, or several more here. Kuba Puig, the cut is smooth, BD. Thank you very much. Somebody asked earlier also if this is here it is from and thank you for the super chat, Kuba. I appreciate that. Austin Schaumburg said, "Is your hair always that short, or am I thrown off by you not having a hat on?" My hair's always this short, except when I go a month without cutting it. It gets longer, but I've had pretty much this haircut since I was like 16 years old. A couple times I let my hair grow out and I just got kind of combed it over, but I was like, I hate this. I don't like having hair. I just like the tight fade, good to go. And the best part about this is it's free. So, so there's that too.
Haircuts are expensive, man. I got one last week that was like $21. So
all mine costs is time. All right. So, yes, that's absolutely. So I appreciate the everybody noticing, and I knew it was going to happen too. We talked about that, but I appreciate that. And I love it. It's great. Michael S. with a super chat. Why couldn't Notre Dame run the ball or stop the run at USC? We kind of talked about that in the post-game show. Why couldn't they run the ball? USC was basically going to say, we're going to outnumber you and out-leverage you and make it hard on you. And Notre Dame could have pounded their head against the wall and tried to run the ball into outnumbered boxes, or they could have said, let's rip them up with the pass game, and that's exactly what they did. They just
was it 318 yards, right? Or whatever it was.
23
right?
of 26.
Yeah.
So now it wasn't good enough, mainly because the second part they couldn't do. Why? Yeah. That's a long conversation. There's a lot of different reasons. The scheme wasn't good. Linebacker play wasn't good. All the stuff we talked about in the postgame show was a bad plan, and that bad plan wasn't executed well. That's a bad combination, real bad combination. And at times, USC's kids made some really good plays. I mean, that's part of it too, but it's not the only reason. Right. That they didn't have success.
Yeah. And I mean, you have to give them part credit, right? Andrew Voorhees is a good football player. Austin Jones is a good football player, but Notre Dame made them look like elite football players, right? And that just can't happen. Just can't happen.
Yep. Next one here is from, we actually already got to that one. This is from Ryan Elliott. Brian, thoughts on a possible LSU matchup? They're probably going to be ranked too high, but I think that would be a huge draw. Well, I mean, it'd be a huge draw. I don't know if it's possible based on, I mean, if USC loses this weekend, it's not out of the realm of possibility that Alabama gets into the playoff, which I think is insanely stupid. But at the same time, who are you going to take? Ohio State, who just got curb stomped by Michigan? I mean, it's everyone that's arguing for expanded playoff, like this is not the year for you to be banging that drum, because you're going to have trouble getting 4 good teams into the playoff this year, much less 8 or 12. You know what I mean? Like there's like 3 teams that are deserving of playoff berths right now. With all due respect to USC, they earned the 4 spot for now, but this USC team would get destroyed by almost every playoff team that I've seen going back up until Michigan State in 2016. That's probably the last playoff team I've seen that wouldn't whoop this Michigan team, in my opinion, or this, not Michigan, this USC team, with all due respect, including the last 2 Notre Dame teams that made the playoff, would beat this USC team, in my opinion. So anyway, that's a different conversation for a different day. But yes, LSU would be a huge draw. I think it's a favorable matchup for Notre Dame. I won't spend too much time on it, just because if it is the matchup, we'll have plenty of time to talk about it. But that's not a matchup that would scare me. It's not. First of all, I don't know. But here's the thing too, Ryan, is part of the reason I don't want to talk too much about the bowl game yet is I don't know who's going to be playing, who they're going to be playing, and then who's going to be playing for either of those 2 teams.
Right.
Yep. So it's just a little too early for that. But I just in big picture, Ryan, to address I would love an LSU matchup in a bowl game. I would love it.
For sure. Notre Dame's had pretty good success against LSU in bowl games. So
that's right.
Yep.
Bob Kosky, thank you, Bob. Brian and Ryan, what are your thoughts on Tommy Rees? Do you cats believe he deserves another year, or do you think Freeman should let him go? We have no opinion on that we care to share. That's not our call. There's really nothing that positive that comes from us weighing in on that, and that's just not what we do. I've said this before, Bob, on the website. I'll just make it clear here. As a former coach, I don't find it appropriate or right for me to go out there and say coaches should be fired for reasons other than, like, I had no problem saying Scott Frost needed to go because it wasn't about football. Why I thought he needed to be fired. It was other stuff. I have no problem criticizing the hire of Hugh Freeze. I'm all for second chances, but sometimes people think that forgiveness means, okay, you can go right back to the job you had, right? Like, no, I can forgive you for your transgression, but that doesn't mean I'm going to trust you again and then hire you again, right? I mean,
he even got a better job technically, which is wild.
Yeah, wild. But it doesn't matter what we think about it. Yeah. We're going to evaluate the job that Coach Rees did. We'll evaluate the job and the expectations for what he needs to do. What does he get better at if Coach Freeman keeps him, which as of right now, I fully anticipate Tommy Rees being the offensive coordinator next year. I don't think Marcus Freeman's going to go shake up his staff too much. And I kind of understand it, Ryan. Like, look, you went through bit of a crazy year. You're all kind of learning there's some good things and some bad things. For the most part, I need you to make this change. I need you to make this change. As long as you're cool with that, let's roll. Let's roll together and move forward. But, will that be the case? I have no idea. I anticipate him being back. And it's going to then be about, okay, what does Tommy Rees need to do to get this team to maximize his potential in offense? That's what we're going to focus our time on. And I don't mean, Bob, your question's fine. And I hope when people ask this and we say we're not answering it, I'm not mad about it being answered. I asked. I completely understand where y'all are coming from with all of this. It's natural. It's just that's not something I'm comfortable doing, and it's not something that I want on my channel. And so everyone has been made aware that that's not what we're speaking on. And we'll address the decisions that are made and the coaches that are on staff.
Ultimately I want what's best for the program. So whether Tommy Rees is a part of that or he isn't, we'll talk about if he is a part of the solution, if he's not a part of the solution, and our conversation will come from there, right? But ultimately the bottom line, and I've never steered away from this fact, is that I'm a fan of Notre Dame football, right? And I want Notre Dame football to be very successful. And I will lay out, just as Brian just stated, what I think they need to best do with whoever is the coach, whoever is the coordinator, whatever players on the field, what I feel like they need to do to make them the best possible product that they can to get back to where they need to go. That's the point blank to it. So that's, I agree, because look, we all are professional in something, right? In different avenues. And I don't think anybody would appreciate anyone saying that we should get fired from
I've
our
had
well-being.
people say that to me on Twitter, and I don't care much for it.
Yes,
or at least I used to not. I don't care anymore. I mean, I'm not going to fire myself. So, I mean, it just, but the other thing too, it does.
If you tried firing yourself, that'd be pretty hysterical.
Yeah.
I can just imagine you like looking in the mirror, like, Brian, we need to have a conversation. Can you sit down?
Like, and then I start if I start doing that, then you need to call someone.
I'll
need to be committed.
I'll give you an Irish breakdown straight jacket.
I would need some help there. The other thing too, in all seriousness too, Ryan, is it doesn't matter what we think. Like Jack Swarbrick's not sitting at his desk. Like, come on, Driscoll, answer the dang question. I need to know what to do. Marcus Freeman's not sitting at his desk being like, man, has Driscoll weighed in on what I should do at the offensive coordinator or not? Like, maybe I should call him and ask him what he thinks. I promise you that's not happening. And so it doesn't matter. And so then what if I sit here today and say one of two? I'm going to say one of two things because then people take it the wrong way if I say one. What if I say, you know what, he needs to move on from Tommy Rees? And then he doesn't. And then I have to then work with this coaching staff to try to get intel or get scoop. And or if I say he should be fired and then I'm critical of Tommy Rees next year, it's going to be, well, you only think that because you don't think he should be here. You don't like him. You're a hater, whatever the case may be. Right. Then the flip side is what if I say, nope, Marcus Freeman needs to come back or bring Tommy Rees back. No doubt about it. Absolutely. And then he doesn't. And then I'm like, oh, okay, then he hires someone else. And let's say I don't like that hire. Oh, you're just saying that because you were Tommy's boy. Or you didn't think he should. So it doesn't matter what I say, and it's going to be harder for me to be perceived as objective if I've weighed in on what he should do, if I have a negative reaction to what he does. And so since my opinion doesn't matter, I mean, because if my opinion mattered, Brian Kelly wouldn't have been brought back after 2016. So clearly they're not listening to me at Notre Dame, right? And a lot of Brian Kelly's hires would have been different if it was up to me. So it just doesn't matter. I'm going to evaluate the coaches that are here and the decisions that Marcus Freeman makes. It's up to him, and he gets paid a lot more than I make to make those decisions. And that's kind of where I'm at. So, yeah, that's where I'm at on that one. And I know not everyone's going to agree with that, and I understand and I respect it. I respect your disagreement. I'm just telling you where I'm at on that one. Let's see here, Ryan. This is an interesting one. I want to get your thoughts on this from Brent Smith. I'll give my short answer, and then you can follow up. Brian and Ryan, do you believe next year there'll be less substitution at the safety position? Yes. No. Yes, but partly because if everyone's healthy, yes. If not, no. Part of the rotation this year was about health, but there will always be a rotation safety. They will always play at least 3 safeties every game.
Yeah.
Thoughts on that, Ryan?
Yeah, I'm just thinking of the names that are going to be potentially in the room next year, which will be interesting, right? Like you'll have Xavier Watts coming back. I know Justin Walters is still on the roster. You'll have Peyton Bowen coming in. You'll have Adon
Ramon
Schuler
Henderson.
coming in, Ramon Henderson. You'll have Ben Minich coming in. So I'm interested to see how much that freshman class is able to capitalize on playing time, Brian, because I know we've talked about this a lot, right? Like I expect Peyton Bowen, if he's a part of the class, to have a significant role next year. But I wouldn't be shocked if Adon Schuler's too good to keep off the field in some capacity, right? But I mean, to your point, I don't think that the safety room is going to be incredibly deep from a experience level next year. I mean, like you're going to have Ramon back, you're going to have Xavier back that have played a decent amount of football. Maybe Brandon Joseph, although I don't really anticipate that one as we're kind of currently sitting. So I don't think there's a lot of depth from a veteran perspective next year, but it'll be interesting to see how the freshmen are able to kind of crack into the rotation next year. That'll be kind of because I mean, what if Peyton Bowen and Adon Schuler are just too good to keep off the field, and then you start mixing it up with the Ramon Hendersons, the Xavier Wattses, then that kind of changes my answer a little bit, right? Like then that gets a little different, but.
Jason Sexton asked, Brian and Ryan, when was the last time Notre Dame had such a gap-closing quarterback room if you include the 23 class? Well, I mean, honestly, the 2018 starting lineup was really flipping good.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I mean, Notre Dame had arguably the best cornerback, one of the best cornerback rooms in the country that year if you look at the starters. Now, the difference was, the problem was, because Dante Vaughn was hurt that year and never was 100%, when you lost one of the starters, there was a big drop-off because of Dante's injury. And then after Dante, there wasn't a whole lot. It was like freshman Tariq Bracy, who was, good at times, but he was not the guy you wanted to be playing against Clemson's Giants, right? But that cornerback room was really good. That cornerback room was as good as anybody. And that's part of the reason that Clemson felt so confident they were going to win the title after they beat Notre Dame, because they were not at all worried about Clemson's defense compared to Notre Dame's that year.
Right.
And so, but the depth is the thing. And so, look, next year's cornerback tandem, if Cam Hart comes back, I think could be every bit as good, if not better than the 2018 group.
Definitely bigger.
Yeah.
Definitely bigger.
I think it can be better.
Yeah.
Now, here's the thing. If everybody pans out, Jason, that's the key, is like, what if these guys don't pan out? If everybody pans out and Jaden Mickey's as good as we think, and Christian Gray's as good as we think, and Micah Bell, you have to kind of go back to the early 90s when Notre Dame was putting out first and second round draft picks every year in the secondary. I mean, Jeff Burris, Tom Carter, Bobby Taylor, Willie Clark. I mean, they were putting out high draft picks nonstop. And that's kind of where I think it can get to, at least at corner. Safety, you're going to need another good year to back up this. It's a great, I mean, there's not a better safety group in the country, in my opinion, than the one they have now. But it's needed because it's
thin right now.
Yeah.
Yep.
And you need to follow it up with another really good safety class, in my opinion.
Mm-hmm.
Or a deep corner class that has kids that can then move to safety. Like, if, let's say they sign 3 corners again in 2024, and there's a couple kids that are on the board that, like, if the kid doesn't stick at corner, could be a really good cover safety, then do that at least. But they need to get more kids that have safety potential, in my opinion.
Agree.
All right, let's get to some more here. Jonathan Gabrick. And we have a basketball question we're going to get to here in a second as well. But he said, Hudson Card to the portal. Could another failed Longhorn quarterback end up in Nebraska? First of all, I do not consider Hudson Card a failed quarterback.
He played pretty well in the limited time he had this year. So, yeah.
I think he threw for over 300 yards in the last game he started. Look, there was no way in heck that they were not going to start Quinn Ewers this year.
Even though everything I heard, Hudson Card was better in the preseason than Quinn Ewers.
Yeah.
But
a lot of people have argued that he outplayed, but you can't not start him for some legitimate reasons, some not very legitimate reasons.
Sure.
But that's just part of the deal in the modern era, right?
Uh-huh.
And look, so does that mean that Joe Burrow was a failed Ohio State quarterback? You know what I mean? So he is not Casey Thompson. I mean,
No,
that's
much
just
more talented than Casey
yeah.
Thompson.
Now, would I look at Hudson Card? He's one of several kids that I'll look at, and one of several kids that I'll talk about. You know, the reports came out during the show that he was going to be in the portal. That's not unexpected. I also know that there are conversations that have been had with, you know, if you jump in the portal, there'd be some interest. I believe that to be the case as well. But Notre Dame's got to be real careful with that. You can't reach out to kids. Doesn't mean people can't call you or reach out to sources that you know. But I think Notre Dame would look at him as one of several kids to look at. So I consider him? Yes. Would he be definitely that guy's the guy that I want? I'm not there yet. There yet. There's several kids that I like.
I mean, we're obviously still doing our homework on guys that could potentially be in the portal, because there's a lot of guys right now that you're hearing also that aren't in the portal, right? So like until they get in, why are you going to study them just in case they don't enter the portal type of thing? But to the question though, Jonathan, I also do push back against the failed Longhorn quarterback. I think that's unfair to him, because I watched the West Virginia game on the coach's film, and I thought Hudson Card looked very good in that football game.
He did some good things in the Texas Tech game. They lost as well. They couldn't run the ball. Once they got a big lead, they couldn't run the ball. And
I actually thought he had some decent moments since Alabama as well. I don't think it was like this fall off the face of the earth type of conversation. But yeah, I mean, but to the question, Hudson Card is talented enough where I am definitely giving him a look. There's no doubt about it. Is he the guy ultimately? I have no idea. I don't know who else in the portal yet.
He's one of my favorites that's in the portal now.
Oh, like sure.
If no one new enters the portal, he'd probably be my top guy over Cade McNamara. But there's some other guys that we're hearing might jump in the portal that would probably move ahead of him, in my opinion. But we'll see. We'll see. By the way, Ryan, during the show, did you see that the reports now are that Brent Key is going to become the permanent coach at Georgia Tech, which might shake up some things here a little bit. Brent Key, who was the interim coach at Georgia Tech. He was their O-line coach.
Oh,
They're
really?
promoting the interim coach to the head coach at Georgia Tech. Yeah. So
I don't know anything about him, but that's weird.
But
that's weird.
Based on an earlier conversation, that's interesting, if other things happen. So we'll see. Jonathan Gabrick also was talking about the basketball team. He said, I was talking to Ladarius, asking about the basketball team. We are 5-1. They just lost to St. Bonaventure. Such a bad loss. But Bray only uses a 5-man rotation. Occasionally will rotate in one bench player. He refuses to play young talent unless he's forced to. We get gassed in the second half. A lot of that's correct. And as far as Bray has always been notorious for playing short benches. But the only reason he played only 6 guys in the most recent game is because Marcus Hammond, the transfer from Niagara, is still hurt. When Marcus Hammond comes back in, immediately the bench goes to 7. And the other one too is Dom Campbell, the freshman big man, was playing, but he got hurt as well. He should be back soon. Once Dom Campbell and Marcus Hammond come back, you're going to see an 8-man rotation, which is deep for Bray, because also you have you have the current starters and all that kind of stuff. So did that just happen? Let's see here. I just want to see if that happened or not. Did he announce it? Give me 1 second. Hold on a second.
Is there breaking news on the podcast right now?
Maybe, but I'm trying to find it here. Doesn't look like. Where'd that go? Where did it go? So, no, it's not. So it's a retweet. So I'm glad that I made sure I checked on that real quick. So anyway,
nothing, guys. Nothing happened.
Yeah, false alarm. Anyway, but the thing is there's 2 guys that are hurt. 2 guys that are hurt for Notre Dame right now that will be part of the rotation, including a transfer that was an 18-point all first team all MAA. I always want to say the MAC, but it's not that MAC. It's the other MAC, the 2A MAC, in Marcus Hammond. So, and then of course this year, all 3 freshmen are going to be part of the rotation this year. J.J. Starling is starting. Van Leuben Allen is playing a ton. He was their lead. He had a double-double in the most recent game. And as I mentioned before, Dom Campbell will play a lot when he gets back from health. And he was playing before he got hurt. So, but yes, it is maddening how thin Bray's bench is. It really is. And how he never has full scholarships at basketball. It's maddening. But I just wanted to clarify that little tidbit there. Gavin Harden, I'm gonna leave this one to you, Ryan. What's keeping Notre Dame from moving Maris Lufau to Viper full time, since he plays better just going forward?
I mean, Gavin, it would be something that I would entertain, right? I think that the thing with this year is if you go back to 2020, I felt like there was a lot of good signs for Marist, right? Like, was he always sure of what he saw? Absolutely not. But I mean, I remember watching the Alabama game from 2020 where I was just like, Marist Liufau was one of the few players defensively that I would say looked like he wasn't on a different planet from Alabama that day, right? Like he was moving, he was playing physically. Unfortunately, he gets hurt in 2021 and just doesn't look. I mean, he didn't take the maturation from a processing perspective that you would have liked, right? Like he's just out there, and I'll be very honest, right? Like Marist Liufau is running very aimlessly on the football field at times, and there's a lot of reps where I'm just like, I don't understand exactly what he's looking at. I don't understand what his key is. I'm very confused on what this step there is. But for this offseason, if Marist Liufau comes back, it would definitely be something that I would entertain because he won't be a full-time Viper because, I mean, what's he, 235 pounds, right? So he's not going to play on the edge every rep. But is there a role that Marist Liufau can play at Viper next year? I think so. I definitely think so.
Let me ask you this question, Ryan.
Mm-hmm.
What would you think if Notre Dame decided they want to go to like a 3-3 look where they kind of used him as a sort of a rush player that would also drop into the flats and do some of that hook curl stuff?
I'd be okay with it. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then not have a Viper, so to speak. I mean, because the point being, if they're going to play him as a full-time Viper, you have to change how you use your Viper.
Agreed.
You know, now what Freeman did at Cincinnati would fit a lot better to that, and is kind of my point. Not what he's doing now. I personally like more of a 4-down, so I wouldn't want to see that.
Yeah,
but I think that would have to be it. But look, he'll play a ton in the nickel. I think there's a role for him at Viper, especially against certain teams. But I think the other thing too, honestly, is I know we're all frustrated by Marist Liufau, but I still would say when he was right late in the year, to your point, Ryan, he was just, I mean, he was pretty good. So how about they figure out why we didn't see that more?
Why
and fix that
games and not
instead of just, toss them aside. I think that to me is my bigger concern. And if you figure things out and you've got to go a different direction, then, sure, we'll go there.
And if he doesn't develop in the offseason, then it's an easy conversation, right?
Right.
But at this point, Marist Liufau is still a really talented athlete. He is. So I would still try to find some way to utilize his strengths, whether that is at Viper, whether that is maturing as a will linebacker, whether that is playing maybe a little bit out in space, a little bit more almost in a rover role where you kind of use him more in a downhill capacity. Like I still think there's ways that you can use Marist Liufau. It's just, unfortunately, it was very uneven this year at will, but I still think I wouldn't just throw him aside. I would still try to figure out a role that would best accentuate his strengths because I think he's too good of an athlete not to work with him. I really do.
Right. Next question here from Coleman Smith. Hypothetically, if Al Golden out of the blue takes another job, who would be your top names to replace him as DC linebacker coach? I have one name for sure that I like, and I know you have a name that you like, and I'll just say those in this hypothetical. If Al Golden were to take another job, my first phone call is probably to Joe Rossi at Minnesota.
He's very good.
And he's a guy, he's got some Notre Dame. I mean, he would be very interested in that job. And he did a phenomenal job this year at Minnesota.
He has the last couple years.
Yes.
The last couple years.
Yes. And he's a Western PA guy. He would fit at Notre Dame. I'll just leave it at that. He would fit very well at Notre Dame. That'd probably be my first call, mainly because I don't know a lot about the guy you're about to talk about, Ryan.
Who's that, Jim Leonard?
No. The dude from Illinois, I thought, would be your first guy.
Oh, Ryan Walters. Yeah. Ryan Walters is a really talented guy as well. The Big Ten has a few of those guys, Brian, honestly, now that I think
my only concern with Jim Leonard is I think he's a very good defensive coordinator, but he has no reputation as a recruiter. Because he just doesn't, from everything I've heard from some people with connections, he doesn't recruit hard. And is he so much better of a coordinator than the other guys that you can get away with that? No. I mean, with all due respect, Joe Rossi's defense was better than his this year. You know what I mean? So that's kind of where I'm at. So
yeah. Well, Ryan Walters is going to be the big name on the market for defensive coordinator for teams that are looking, in my opinion. I mean, I thought he was pretty good over the last couple years, but this year, I mean, Illinois has just been on a different level. They play a lot of multiple fronts. They play a lot of 3 down. They have some 3-4 elements to their scheme, but they're a team that's a really disciplined team. He doesn't blitz a ton on the second level, which is interesting, but he plays a lot of man coverage, a lot of single high stuff. I really like Ryan Walters from Illinois a lot.
Yeah.
So, yeah, that would definitely be on the short list if that possibility did come open, excuse me.
Yeah. There's some really good Midwestern defensive coordinators that you could look at. I think the shine is a little bit off the coach at BC. He was supposedly a finalist for the job last year.
Is that Lacuba?
Yeah, Tim. Yeah, I did not like the job they did this year.
Mm-hmm.
It just didn't adjust, to what their personnel was. I didn't love that job.
Who's the Purdue's defensive coordinator? Because they had a nice year defensively.
Yeah, and despite losing guys. I mean, that was the crazy thing.
Losing a first-round defensive lineman, you got better somehow.
Yeah. Then they lose their top corner from last year as well. I thought I remember that. Ron English, so hard pass.
I didn't know it was Ron English.
Yeah, he's co-coordinators. That's another thing I wouldn't be. Look, I wouldn't mind calling in somebody that's going to be your primary defensive coordinator, but then maybe naming like Mike Mickens as your defensive coordinator or pass game coordinator, because you're going to need to start doing things to make sure you have him locked down, because he keeps recruiting and doing what he's doing right now at corner. He's going to be a hot commodity for some people. And I want to make sure. And I'm not saying he is going anywhere. I mean, people want our opinion. Then when we get our opinion, they run with it and say, oh, they were saying this guy's looking around or whatever. I'm just saying hypothetically, I feel how it all works, that people are going to really be making it. I mean, if you can turn Notre Dame's cornerback room into a strength, that's not an easy thing to do. That's not an easy thing to do at all. Was there Johnny from the boot?
Was there more massive news that just came up? Not for Notre Dame, but for another thing? I'm going to look it up and try to find it.
Yeah.
My bad. Go ahead.
It's all good. So not for Notre Dame. Yeah. So then I'll go to the next question. So Johnny from the boot. So is Notre Dame looking for any transfer portal players? Are there any players that you would be excited for that may or may not be in the portal? Number one, I don't really want to spend a lot of time talking about guys in the that aren't in the portal. I may mention some names here or there, but overall, just not really wanting to go there a whole lot. The 3 positions, and we'll talk about this moving forward, is Viper, receiver, and then quarterback are the top one. And receiver, honestly, Ryan, if they get Caleb Smith and Lorenzo Styles comes back to Notre Dame, I don't know if I'd go to the portal for a receiver. I really don't, because you'd have the 3 sophomores, Tobias Merriweather. You'd have 5, the 5 incoming kids. I would honestly, if I had that extra scholarship, I'd honestly consider bringing Matt Salerno back for another year, as long as the promise is, or the understanding is that this is a depth thing. You're not going to play a ton. You know what I mean? Good special teams kid, good leadership. But, I mean, I don't know if I'd go to the portal. I want to develop the young kids, because there's a lot of talent in that young group, especially if Lorenzo leaves, then I think you need to go to the portal to get somebody that's got some experience.
Yes.
The alternative is if there's a stud receiver that wants to come, okay, well, yeah, then you take him. If Dante Thornton wants to come, I'm having that conversation with him. I don't know if I definitely would take him, because him and Tobias are very similar, but I would have that conversation. But we'll that's going to kind of be the topic of tomorrow's show. So we'll talk a little bit more about this. And that's what Savage Science Fitness's question was. Hey, Ryan and Brian, do you think we could land that wideout from Oregon who would love your opinion? That's referring to Dante Thornton. Now, Notre Dame recruited Dante Thornton coming out of high school.
I don't know much about him.
Yeah, very tall, long, stretch the field kind of guy. Played some for them this year. I'm looking up his numbers. Yeah, it's like 17 catches for almost 400 yards. Just give me a second to look up his numbers here real fast. I liked him a lot coming out of high school.
Why is he transferring?
I don't know.
That's weird.
Well, their OC just left, and they've got a pretty deep young receiving core. But and his style doesn't really fit what they're doing. They want the shorter, and he's a tall, long, vertical guy, and he's a DC, Maryland kid, so he's far away from home. And that glitz and glamour works great till you have to live in that every single day. But he had 17 catches for 366 yards and a touchdown. He's a talented kid. My only thing would be, and he had 4 catches for 151 yards against Utah. Had one catch for 46 yards and a touchdown against Washington. But he's real similar to what Tobias is, and kind of Dion, and I mean Dion and Tobias are all kind of similar players. So I think I'd want a little bit need of a different type of guy, maybe, but that's my gut reaction to it, honestly.
Sure.
But that's also partly because I don't think Dante would look at Notre Dame. But if Dante was I'll just end, Ryan, I'd make the call. He's a talented kid. I'd make the call.
Yep.
Would he definitely be the guy that I take? I don't know. I'd have to think about it. I love it. And it's not because of his ability. Part of doing this, Ryan, is not just saying, let's go get the best receiver out there. He's got to fit your room.
Sure.
He's got to meet a need that you don't have. And I don't think Dante necessarily meets a need that they don't have right now, in my opinion. But it comes, well, you can't have enough big-time playmakers. And I'm like, yeah, that's also true. That's also true. Yeah. So, yep, that's kind of where I'm at on that. Anything you want to add to that?
No, I feel similarly because, I mean, if you got a kid like that is, going to get immediate playing time, then you're taking Deion Colsey or Tobias Merriweather off the field, right? Like, I agree. I think that there was already been a couple like slot options that have gone into the portal that if I was Notre Dame and, you needed kind of that different type of player, I would take a deep look at, to your point. But yeah, I mean, if he's too similar to the Tobiases and the Deons of the world, then it's kind of productive to developing those guys that you already had on your roster that you've already put time into over the last year or two, right? So yeah.
Yep. Agree. John Bertucci, with a super chat. Thank you, John, very much. I'm assuming Mayer is out for the bowl. What do you want to see from the O if he sits in the bowl? Who needs to step up? Can Pine win without Mayer? A couple quick things. Michael Mayer has not announced he's not playing in the bowl game. I would guess, it's 100% a guess that he wouldn't play. But knowing Michael Mayer, I don't think it's going to be an easy decision for him, to be honest with you. And I think part of it might depend on who they play. But I would, if I was advising him, I'd tell him not to play. I don't like sitting out the bowl game. That's not my thing. I think you should see it through, but that's not the reality of the universe we live in. If football was the way that I wanted it to be, you play in every game your team plays, but it's not how football is. Michael Mayer has given you everything he has, And I would hate to see him go into a bowl game and get undercut by some DB who doesn't want to get run over by him and his knee gets torn up. I would hate that. If he wants to play, if he wants to play, I'll play him, Ryan. But I would understand. And if I was on his side and I was his parent or his advisor, I'd tell him not to play. If I was the coach of Notre Dame, I'd say we'd love to have you play because we think we can win with you.
Yeah, if I'm his advisor, if I'm the agent that's going to represent him, like that would just. Yeah, that would be a decision that you would have to sit down and have a long talk. But I mean, Brian, unfortunately, we have seen that situation, right? Like you saw Jalen Smith, you saw Jake Butt a couple years ago in the bowl game, got hurt himself. Matt Corral last year got banged up in the bowl game. Like it's
now, of course, those are the examples we're going to point to, but more players have not gotten hurt. That have, but it's enough. And Jake Butt and Jalen Smith were never the same guys. They were never the same athletes after that. Jake Butt was never able to recover from that injury. Jalen Smith really did to a degree, but he was never the same guy. I addressed this already in a show, Ryan, or on the board, Ryan. I'm curious to hear your thoughts. Who would you rather play? From Mike Ganocci, I hope I'm saying that correctly, Michael. Who would you rather play in a bowl game, South Carolina or Mississippi? Now, this comes from our bowl projections yesterday. The Gator Bowl is where most people are projecting Notre Dame to play either South Carolina or Mississippi State. Who would you rather play?
We talked about it a little bit yesterday. Me and Sean were actually split on this one, Brian. I would actually rather play South Carolina personally. One is because that Mississippi State offense I hate with a dying passion, right? And it's almost like the reverse triple option. And it's like one of those things where like it's just so annoying to defend. And then also South Carolina's coming in pretty hot, man. They just beat Tennessee a couple weeks ago. They have the big win against Clemson this past week. I think that I think you'd be taking on a South Carolina team that seems to be going in a really good direction, So I'd rather take them on because I think that does a little bit more for you to say that you beat a team that just beat Tennessee and Clemson back-to-back weeks to end your season. And I think that gives you a little bit more lure than playing a Mississippi State team that is very gimmicky team in my opinion.
And a really good defense, by the way. Really good defense. Very underrated defense in Mississippi State. It's funny, but like the last two jobs Mike Leach has had, he's built they've had some good defenses. The best defense Alex Grinch ever had was the one he had for Mike Leach at Washington State.
Hercules Maxi Alpha, man. And was Deion Buchanan on that team? I think he might have been.
Think so. I think so. But in the defense this year they had was really salty. I mean, it really was.
Yeah.
So, and also you get nothing out of beating Mississippi State. Nobody cares about Mississippi State. I'm not saying that to be disrespectful, but like from a recruiting national perception standpoint, nobody cares about that.
And South Carolina, we know South Carolina's, they have the little NIL stuff behind the scenes too. Yeah. So anytime you beat one of those teams, they're flawed a little bit.
Won against South Carolina for recruits this cycle. I've never heard Mississippi State's name mentioned with any recruits. And I think the final point is to your point, Ryan. I think the buzz that South Carolina would have going into the game, blowing out Tennessee and then beating Clemson on the road.
Yep.
Like I say, well, did that diminish your thoughts on Clemson? Somebody asked that, and it's a fair question. I don't think it does. But you now go beat the team or even pound the team that beat them. It's like, okay, and it's an SEC win. It's never bad to get an SEC win. There's just some SEC teams that no one's going to care if Notre Dame beats Kentucky. No one's going to care if they beat Mississippi State. Ole Miss or South Carolina, people would care a lot more about those, in my opinion. Brent Key asked, Brian, which coach needs to be put on notice? Al Washington or Al Golden? Perhaps we lost Keon because Freeman and our D-line coach recruited him and circumstances change. Any thoughts? There's a lot of circumstances that change with Keon, but I don't think you can just dismiss Al Washington's role because he needed to fight to keep him. And he talked to him, but I don't think he did enough there. I don't think Al Golden did enough there. It's blame to go around for the Keon situation, and some of it they could control. But I mean, to me, honestly, I don't know about put on notice. I use that kind of roughly. I don't know if I would put it directly. I don't think everybody focuses on Tommy Rees. I was not blown away with the job Al Golden did this year. I think they relied on defense of talent a lot this year as really good players. And I think the biggest issue that I have, Ryan, that concerns me is Al Golden has not shown the ability against good teams to be able to stop the pass and not get gashed by the run or vice versa. And we saw that against Marshall. They had a very defensive pass game-oriented game plan, which I thought was a mistake, and that allowed Marshall to run all over them. They had a great game plan to shut down Ohio State's offensive pass game. And once Ryan Day figured out we can run on them, they couldn't do anything about it. And we saw the same thing at USC. And the lack of adjustments all year was troubling. Like if this game plan was good coming in, they were good. And the games that they won against those teams like North Carolina ended up not being a great running team, as we found out when the competition upped. They also just dominated them in the trenches. It wasn't necessarily the game plan per se. So I have some concerns, to be honest with you, about that. And now, look, statistically, they did some really nice things, but they never had a great game. They had a lot of really good games, but no great games until BC, who's mess.
Yeah.
So I have some concerns there. I'm not saying I'm moving on or firing people. I'm not doing that. I'm saying you can't just keep doing what you're doing, and you have to be willing to address the fact that the worst position group on this roster on the defense for the entire season, with the exception of a couple games, was linebacker. You can't ignore that. Yes, Al Washington did a great job this year, but he did a good job. And I think at times Al Washington was somewhat hindered, and his group was hindered by a game plan that didn't turn them loose. They were being used to occupy blockers for the blitzers that weren't getting home. So I think Al Golden at the top is really where my conversation would be about. We need to get a lot better. We need to get a lot better. I like what he does. Here's the problem. I said all that to say this. I believe the problem is he had too much of an NFL focus. In the NFL, teams just don't run enough to really scare you. The run game for a lot of teams is just a little minor complement to the pass game. And in college football, it's a different animal. If you can shut down a team's pass game in the NFL, you're going to win more often than not. I mean, other than the Titans, there's a couple teams that are starting to run a little bit more, Ryan, but for the most part, if you shut down Sean McVay's pass game, you're probably going to beat the Rams. Am I wrong?
Well,
You
this
know,
year, because the refs are awful. They're
right?
really bad this year.
But I mean, that's what Bill Belichick did to him in the Super Bowl a few years ago too. He just didn't let him throw on him, and then they had nothing to go with. So my point is that's with a lot of teams. If Pat Mahomes has a bad game, Rams have or the Chiefs have a tough time winning.
Mm-hmm.
So that's not true in college football for most teams. It's not. And so I think that there was too much of an NFL thought process to this. Hey, we got to shut down the pass game. Okay, great. You shut down Marshall's pass game, and they ran for over 200 yards on you and beat you. Great, but you didn't give up a lot of pass yards. You kept C.J. Stroud in check. Yeah, but they ran it down your throat for a quarter and a half and won the football game. Hey, Caleb Williams had one of his least productive passing games of the season. Okay, but he rushed for 3 touchdowns, and the team rushed for 200, and you lost, right? I mean, that's college football, man. And just that was problematic for me. Right? It was really problematic for me.
Yeah.
And they didn't have the injuries that you can point to for the offense. They didn't lose Avery Davis type, in my view. I don't think anyway. Jacob Lacey quit, but he played 9 snaps the game before he left. They weren't using him. Yep. Right? Now you could argue that's a problem, but they weren't using him. So I wasn't in love with what I saw.
Mm-hmm.
I wasn't in love with what I saw. Thoughts?
I mean, we talked about it, right? Like, I think that there's a hierarchy to coaching, right? So if the team's not playing well, you start from the top up. You say, is it a head coach the issue? If you're looking at growth that we talked about with Marcus Freeman and him turning the corner, it seems, and taking control of his program and seeming to go in the right direction, well, then my next step is the offensive and defensive coordinators, right? Because they're in charge of their side of the football. If there is an issue with the schematic approach to the defense, if they're asking players to do things that they're not good at, because we talked about this with the Al Golden situation, right? The linebackers the year before were not as bad as they were this year, and they were the same dudes, and they seem to regress. So when that happens, my immediate thought process is there must be something there with the coordinator spots that you take a look at. But it keeps trickling down for me, Brian, right? So I think that for Al Washington specifically, I think some guys definitely didn't make big jumps forward. I think there were some regressions in some spots.
He's
a guy. Yeah. So he's a guy that I would have very close eyes on moving forward. There's no doubt. I do think that there's some things, though, where you can say, to your point, where the defensive line used correctly all the time. That's not really out on Al Washington. That's a scheme thing, right? That's a defensive coordinator's options to use a defensive line specifically. I'll look at him with the rotation of the defensive line for sure. I'll look with him and say, why was Isaiah Foskey a really good player last year and he was still just a really good player this year? Why wasn't he elite? Why wasn't he one of the best in college football? That's the stuff I looked at. So Al Washington, I would definitely have an eye on. But to your point, I do think that there were several games. You talked about Marshall. We'll talk about Ohio State from a run defense perspective in the second half. You talk about USC from a run defense perspective, where I feel like the defensive game plan was not up to snuff. You talk about Navy, right? Like I was at the Navy game where in the second half, there were just no adjustments to stopping the triple option. Mm-hmm. And so, I mean, there's instances where I would say, for me, I have a very close eye on Al Golden moving forward. And I have an eye on Al Washington as well, because I think both of them show that there were some things to be. There's like a couple red flags that pop up a little bit with that situation.
Yep. For sure. And recruiting. Like, how often do you hear Al Golden's name with recruits? Not often. Not often. All right, we got a few more. We got to get out of here. Ryan and Brian, I don't think we need another transfer quarterback. Let's roll with who we have and look at getting wideouts and D linemen and edge players in the portal. I'm just going to say this. We will discuss this more in detail tomorrow. The reason that I think quarterback is there, and again, we'll dive into this tomorrow. The big reason why, Ryan, is you can't go into next year with your current group. And number one, I love Kenny Minchie. I don't want a freshman quarterback to have to start unless he's a Trevor Lawrence. Yep. And Kenny Minchie's a really good player. He's not Trevor Lawrence. You know who else is not Trevor Lawrence? Every other quarterback in the 2023 class.
Yeah.
Right? And maybe everybody knows I love Tyler Buckner's health, but you cannot dismiss the lack of development that injuries and COVID have cost him over the last 5 years. You can't. Yep. He's played one full season of football as a quarterback in 5 years. You can't ignore that. And Drew Pine is a nice kid and a solid player, but that's who he is this year. And as we saw, it's not good enough. So I think you need competition. Now, if Tyler Buckner beats that kid out, great. That means he's going to be a dude next year. And I got full faith that he's got the physical talent. But what if he's a dude and gets hurt in third game again because of the style of play he has? This is a kid who's had 2 major season-ending injuries, 1 lower body, 1 upper body. That's problematic for me. You can't assume he's going to be perfectly fine next year. That'd be poor roster management, in my opinion. So I do think you need to go to the portal for another quarterback. I do. And Steve Angeli, nice kid, but I think this team has a chance to compete if they can make a couple tweaks and some guys come back that I hope and think are going to come back. This team's going to have a chance to compete for championship next year. I truly believe that. I could be wrong, but I truly believe that. The one position I'm most worried about keeping that from happening is quarterback for a host of reasons, not just talent, but injury history and all that kind of stuff. So I want as many talented guys in that room as possible and then let the best man win.
I mean, don't you at least want insurance at the quarterback position, right? I mean, you can't put all your eggs into Tyler Buckner's basket next year. You can't put all your eggs into Kenny Minchie's basket. I think that both have a chance to be good if Tyler Buckner can stay healthy, I still think he could be a good player. I think that Kenny Minchie could be a really good player on the next level. But the worst case scenario is that you get a transfer quarterback, he gets beat out, and he's a good insurance backup. I mean, I don't think that there's a big risk to bring in another quarterback. Yeah.
You got to bring in the right guy.
Sure.
Like for me, Jeff Sims is not that guy. Could Cade McNamara be that guy? Yeah, because if Cade wins the job, you've got a steady game manager that showed that if you put talent around him and a really good run game and a really good offensive line and a really good defense, he can do what? He can take you to the playoff, right? Okay. But if he's not the guy, that means he got beat out by a pretty good quarterback, and that you're going to be even better. That would be the floor for me, right? Like if he's not Cade McNamara better, I don't want him, in my opinion. I'm not just bringing I wanted a depth quarterback last year, but I wanted Tyler to be the guy. This year, it's a different deal. You're bringing a guy that can compete for the starting job and compete to help you win championships for me. And there are a couple guys in the portal that have some potential for that, which we'll talk about later. And then there's a couple other guys that I hope jump in the portal that become that guy. All right, last couple questions. We have a super chat here from BDA King. It's not just the bowl game itself Mayor needs to worry about. A lot of more practices before the game too. Yeah, and that's kind of where I'm coming from, BDA. I mean, it's just one of those things where would I love it for that we live in an era where you see the thing through? Yeah, I would love that. I think that's the ideal for me. You made a commitment, you see it through. But I also understand that's not where we are. And Michael Mayer is one of those kids that I feel has given the program everything he has. And I would understand it. Like I look at his situation a whole lot differently than I do Kyle Hamilton's last year, who I think quit on his team. I believe that. No one's going to convince me otherwise. I do not feel that way about Michael Mayer. The polar opposite. I didn't feel that way about Kyron Williams. I understood why Kyron was banged up all year. He put his heart and soul into every single snap he took at Notre Dame, his whole career, especially last year. I understood he had to make a business decision. I get it. I don't like it as a rule big picture, but I'm not going to punish a kid's decision for doing what the current system allows him to do or advocates for him to do. I'm going to push back against the system, but also support a player's decision to make that decision because that's the world we live in now. We have a super chat from Lucas Deason, and these are the last couple things, and we're going to get out of here and kind of get to there. Got some things I got to get taken care of here. Super chat here from Lucas. Tanner McKee and Elijah Higgins combination. I would look at Tanner McKee if he entered the portal. Elijah Higgins is a nice player. I like Elijah Higgins, but I don't think there's the fit or the need at Notre Dame. I think Deion Colsey kind of does a lot of what you're going to ask him to do. The tight ends at Notre Dame do a lot of what you asked Elijah Higgins to do. I would be fine. If you're going to get a receiver, get a shifty guy, get a route runner, get an after the catch guy. I don't necessarily need a 6'4" guy that can run. And Elijah Higgins he's not really a runner. He's more of like an H-back, honestly, in what Notre Dame would do. And I just don't see the need. Very good player. But again, a lot of this, as I said, is about fit. How's a guy going to fit on your current roster? There's some guys that I look at in the portal. That's a really good football player. Would you take him? No, because the fit's not there. The need's not there. And that's how I'd feel about Elijah Higgins. McKee, a little different story if he entered the portal, but right now he's not in the portal, so it really doesn't matter. And then Garth Cassidy with the last one. Brian or Ryan, do you think our starting defensive line next year could be Nana, Cross, Aiden, Keanaaina, and Mills? No, not at all. A couple things here. Number one is I would have Rubio in there at nose over Aiden. Number two, you're going to have a hard time getting after the quarterback with that group. You got two big ends and two defensive tackles in your starting lineup. And I just don't think that would make a lot. Now, if could you do that against Navy? Could you do that if there's a team that's like a power, like a Wisconsin? Maybe, but you're going to need somebody who can get after the quarterback a little bit. So in that situation, if you want to move Mills inside and have Mills and Cross and then Rubio and Aiden be your runners, your rotation guys, okay, I can live with that a little bit. But you're going to need somebody else on the edge that can get after the quarterback. And I just don't see anybody that Riley Mills, probably your best pass rusher on the outside. Yeah, we'll see. We'll see. We'll see how that pans out. I don't think there's enough disruptiveness in that group, Garth. But I mean, look, those are four of your more proven players coming back. So I understand the question. It just not seeing that right now. So anyway, that's going to do it for today's show. I want to thank everybody for being with us today. Really enjoyed that show. We'll be back tonight. Sean Stiers in about an hour and a half. We'll have a IB Nation Sports Talk show tonight at 6:00. And then, of course, we'll be back tomorrow at 1 p.m. So we'll do a show. We're going to kind of look at the portal. What are some of the needs that Notre Dame has in the portal? What are some of the positions they should look at? Where are the priority lists at the portal? We'll talk about why Notre Dame has to look at the portal differently. We'll talk about Notre Dame's portal philosophy. And then we'll talk about some specific guys that are in the portal that we like. And so that's what we will do tomorrow. So anyway, for the rest of the team, I appreciate you all very much. Hit that like button, everybody. Hit the subscribe button. Hit the notification bell. Sign up for the message board at boards.irishbreakdown.com. Make sure you're checking out our website at irishbreakdown.com, our main website. All of our content at irishbreakdown.com is free. So you definitely want to check that out. All of our articles, all of our news. And of course, if you are listening via podcast platform, we would love it if you give us a 5-star review. Also, make sure you are subscribed to the CFB Nation podcast channel and the YouTube channel if you haven't already. So for the rest of the crew at Irish Breakdown, thank you all for being with us today. We will talk to you again very soon on the Irish Breakdown podcast.